Chapter 333. Although it was an excellent material, in order to maintain his image among the ninjas, Watergate didn't directly take the shinobi down. Instead, he looked at the heavily injured enduring ghost with a compassionate expression and said to Nangongja with sympathy, "Nangongja, this ninja who looks a bit unusual must be a ninja who survived Danzo's cruel experiment. Since he was born in Woodleaf, then he is naturally a member of Woodleaf. As the Hokage of Woodleaf, I have the obligation to provide protection and treatment for this kind of Woodleaf ninja. Now that Danzo has been expelled, this ninja will be a member of Woodleaf from now on. You put him down first, I will send someone to treat him." After that, Watergate waved his hand and called two of his direct umbu to stand in front of Nangongja. It seems like they wanted to take the shinobi down from Nangongja's sword. But Nangongja's expression wasn't so good at the moment. Because when Watergate mentioned Danzo, he didn't use the word exterminate or imprison, but expel. Doesn't that mean that Danzo has safely left Woodleaf? This is a bit inconsistent with my purpose. As if he saw Nangongja's thoughts, Watergate walked forward and patted Nangongja's shoulder. With his usual warm smile, he said to Nangongja, "Don't worry, Danzo has suffered heavy losses this time. 80% of his men are hidden in various bases in Woodleaf. Our attack this time was very sudden, so a lot of important information and materials were not transferred out. So it can be said that the root has not been completely eradicated. There are only a few of them left. Whether it's you or me, it's easy to deal with them. Why are you so worried about Danzo's life? You and your family are safe now." Although Watergate's expression looked very gentle, the hand that patted Nangongja's shoulder contained a lot of strength. As Watergate spoke, the strength in his hand increased. In the end, although Nangongja didn't have any reaction, some of the dust under Nangongja's feet jumped slightly because of Watergate's strength. Nangongja's mood at the moment could be said to be terrible. As expected, no one in a high position would care about the promises between each other. As long as he achieved his goal, it wasn't impossible to turn his back on him. He waved the sword in his hand slightly forward. The tip of the sword that passed through the ninja's body was directly pointed at Watergate's nose. The two umbus standing next to Watergate and Nangongja directly took out their kunai from their ninja bags and pointed it at Nangongja. The ninjas under Watergate who were cleaning the battlefield also stopped their movements and looked at Nangongja closely. As long as Nangongja did anything that could threaten Watergate's safety, they would immediately swarm him. "Minato, you've finally cleared all the obstacles in front of you. Without Sandaime, without Danzo, a mere elder group is nothing more than a paper doll in your eyes. You can play with it however you like. Nangongja, congratulate you with this gift." Then Nangongja fiercely waved the sword in his hand. The ninja that was pierced by the sword was directly thrown to the ground, creating a cloud of smoke. The sound of the sword cutting through the air and the slightly silver-white sword mark left in the air was so eye-catching. Obviously, Nangongja's mood was not so good at the moment. Watergate was not affected by Nangongja's mood at all. He still had a smile on his face as he stretched out his hand and disturbed the sword mark left by Nangongja in the air. He seemed to be very happy that Nangongja could congratulate Nangongja. Then he used his eyes to signal his subordinates to carry the fallen ninja away. Nangongja looked deeply at Watergate. He didn't even have the mood to say goodbye. He directly turned and left the battlefield in the direction of his home. Looking at Nangongja's back, Watergate's chief strategist, Shikaku Nara, slowly walked to Watergate's side. He lowered his voice and said to Watergate, "This Nangongja is still the same as before. Solitary and unruly. He doesn't have the slightest sense of belonging to the Woodleaf. This time we didn't do as he wished. Maybe in his heart he has already started to resent us. If necessary, I can bring a team of elites to deal with him. Although he is still strong, I am confident that I can deal with him." Shikaku Nara, who originally looked a bit ferocious because of the several scars on his face, had a fierce look in his eyes at this moment. He looked even more terrifying. Shikaku Nara's meaning was naturally very clear. Nangongja was an overly sharp weapon. Now that the weapon has developed hatred, as a ninja of the Woodleaf village, Shikaku Nara felt that it was necessary to destroy this resentful weapon. Watergate heard Shikaku Nara's words, but he didn't react. He just turned around and looked at Shikaku Nara's eyes. He put his hands on Shikaku Nara's shoulders and stared at Shikaku Nara's eyes. He slowly said, "Shikaku Nara, I'm indeed not as good as you when it comes to strategizing. But when it comes to controlling people's hearts, you're still not mature enough. Indeed, Nangongja is an overly sharp weapon. But why can't we be the ones to control this weapon? Nangongja is indeed strong enough, but his concerns are too obvious. As long as these concerns still exist, this sharp blade has a scabbard. As long as we have the scabbard in our hands, why should we be afraid that we can't use the sharp blade? After saying this sentence, Watergate directly walked past Shikaku Nara's side and began to walk to the place where the ninjas gathered in this battle. He maintained a half-heartache and half-relief smile while comforting those injured ninjas. Looking at Watergate's actions, even Shikaku Nara, who has always been as wise as an abyss, felt a chill in his heart at this moment. Since when has the position of Hokage been held by a person without scheming? Nangongje, at this moment, was standing on a branch overlooking the battlefield from a distance. His eyes were cold. If Shikaku Nara was here, he may be very surprised to find that the look in Nangongje's eyes at this moment was so similar to the look in Watergate's eyes. Watergate. We still don't know who is the one holding the sharp blade. After he finished speaking, Nangongje turned around and left the branch he was standing on, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 334. When Nangongje stood in front of his house, the sky was already bright. Although the sun had not directly revealed itself, a beautiful white color had already appeared in the eastern sky. Nangongje's house was slightly away from the downtown area of Woodleaf Village, so there was still a large area of forest around it. The slightly cold morning air and the humid atmosphere in the forest combined to form a thin layer of mist that shrouded the earth, looking exceptionally gentle. Gently pushing open the door of his house, Nangongje did not want to disturb the rest of the girls at home. The wooden door that was painted with a layer of paint was slowly pushed open by Nangongje's palm. Nangongje also walked a few steps into the entrance of his house. Quietly taking off his coat and shoes, Nangongje walked into the living room of his house. To Nangongje's surprise, the girls in his house were actually sitting in the living room. Whether it was little Linger who loved to sleep in, Nangongro and Mashiro who usually woke up early to make breakfast for everyone, their eyes were slightly bloodshot at this moment. Their eyes were still a little tired from staying up late. When they saw that Nangongje was on duty, they quietly hid it. The faces of the three girls immediately changed into warm smiles as they looked at Nangongje. The three girls and Nangongje looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Mashiro seemed to feel that it was inappropriate, so she slowly stood up, tidied up her clothes and said to Nangongje, "Last night I was busy last night. I was busy all night last night and only just came back. I've already cooked porridge. It should be time to eat now. I'll go get a bowl for you. After eating some porridge you should rest well too, Gong Gong." As she said that, Mashiro walked to Nangongje's side and naturally took the robe that was stained with blood from Nangongje's hands. She also walked to the entrance and took Nangongje's dirty shoes to the laundry area. Obviously she was going to tidy it up. From the beginning to the end, Mashiro did not say much and Nangongje did not ask much either. After all, Mashiro was a top spy trained by root. As one of the participants of the plan, Nangongje naturally let Mashiro detect something. Not to mention other things, Nangongje had concealed his presence time and time again. Mashiro was completely aware of it. Before this operation, Nangongje had also collected a lot of information from the Blood Garment Pavilion. Mashiro had been helping Nangongje manage the affairs in the Blood Garment Pavilion for all these years, so she naturally knew a lot about these things. She watched as Mashiro went to the kitchen to get porridge for Nangongje. Nangongro also carefully looked at Nangongje's body. She did not find any injuries on him, so she did not say much and walked to her bedroom. It seemed like she wanted to catch up on some sleep. After the two older sisters left, little Linger relaxed a little. She affectionately pulled Nangongje's arm and let Nangongje sit beside her. Brother Nangong, are those guys from Root very powerful? Little Linger really wants to hear the story of you fighting with those bad guys from Root. Can you tell little Linger about it? Xiaoling Air's pair of watery eyes stared at Nangongje. Nangongje couldn't resist for a moment. Therefore, Nangongje decided to tell Xiaoling Air everything that he knew about this matter to an unrelated person like Xiaoling Air. Then, are we safe from now on? After listening to Nangongje's explanation, Ling Air's eyes flashed with an inexplicable light. She asked Nangongje, "What's the matter?" Nangongje explained a lot about this operation. She learned about the destruction of Root and the escape of Danzo. That's right, at least we're safe in Woodleaf. The current Hokage of Woodleaf, Watergate, has a good relationship with me, so with him looking after us, we won't encounter the same dangerous situation as before. Nangongje did not tell little Linger about the schemes between him and Watergate, because these small schemes could not change the fact that Watergate and Nangongje needed each other's help. Even in such a relationship, Minato was still in a relatively weak position, because Minato had been tightly locked by Konoha, and Nangongja not only held the power of the Blood Cloak Pavilion in his hands, but he also didn't have much control over such power. Little Linger, can Brother Nangong promise me one thing? Looking at Nangongja, Little Linger said timidly to Nangongja. Little Linger was usually a carefree girl. She usually said whatever she wanted to say, but now her timid appearance really made Nangongja feel very fresh. It was just like when she left the village with Nangongja. Little Linger was full of fear for the future. Nangongja felt that he might know what Little Linger wanted to ask of him, so he gently placed his hand on Little Linger's head and gently stroked her beautiful hair with the bell ornament. Little Linger, tell me. Now that everything is basically settled, if you have anything you want to do, brother can go with you. Perhaps because of Nangongja's attitude, Little Linger, who was originally a little nervous, slowly calmed down. Little Linger's eyes contained a rare bit of heaviness and sorrow. Grandfather, he has been gone for many years, but I have never had the time to go back and see him. When you were in the Blood Cloak Pavilion, you also sent some subordinates to dig up grandfather's grave, but because of various things, there was no way to personally pull out a weed or light an incense for grandfather's grave. So, I actually just want you to come with me to the village where I used to live and visit my grandfather's grave. After hearing Little Linger's words, Nangongja also remembered that when he was seriously injured and on the verge of death, Mishiro carried him through the forest with great difficulty. Fortunately, they met Ah Weng and he was able to receive treatment in time to save his life. When it was time to leave, Ah Weng knew that he was nearing the end of his life, so he entrusted Little Linger to him. With that said, Nangongja also wanted to see the last traces left behind by Ah Weng in this world. Chapter 335. After agreeing to Lil Linger's request, Lil Linger was finally satisfied as she ran back to her room to catch up on her sleep. However, even the dullest person would be able to sense the joy in Lil Linger's heart. Nangongja's greatest wish was for his family to be happy. Nangongja stood up from the cushion he was sitting on and slowly walked into his kitchen. Mishiro was currently holding a small dish in her left hand and a spoon in her right hand. It seemed like she was trying out the final taste of the congee she made. Mishiro naturally heard Nangongja's movements, but Mishiro still didn't turn his head. It was unknown whether he was looking at Nangongja or the pot of congee in front of him. Originally, I didn't want Rower and Little Linger to know that you participated in such a dangerous plan, but I was still worried about you. I wanted to personally see you return home, so I sat in the living room and didn't go back to rest. However, Rower and Little Linger are a group of mischievous people. They immediately saw through the whole story and insisted on waiting with me for you to come back. After waiting for an entire night, the two of them must be exhausted. Mishiro turned around and placed the dish in front of Nangongja. He smiled faintly at Nangongja and said, "Do you want to try it to see if it suits your taste?" Looking at the dish that was still steaming, Nangongja gently blew on it. He reached out to take the dish from Mishiro's hand and placed it next to his mouth. Seeing Nangongja's action, Mishiro suddenly smiled gently. He gently tapped Nangongja's forehead with a finger and said to Nangongja with a doting tone, "You are still as catty as ever?" When Nangongja heard Mishiro's words, he wasn't shy at all. Instead, he felt proud and said to Mishiro, "Isn't that because of Mishiro's superb cooking skills? That's why a picky guy like me can eat what I like every day." Mishiro looked at Nangongja's face and said to Nangongja with a hint of reminiscence, "Back then, I definitely didn't expect that I would become such a person. Back then it was the first time I left Root's cage and was sent to spy on you. Back then, I didn't have any common sense and even foolishly allowed you to take advantage of me. But it was also the cold and indifferent you that slowly made me feel the taste of home. You made me slowly turn from a tool that was deliberately cultivated to a person who could feel at ease around the stove every day." Mishiro slowly placed the spoon in his hand on the table beside him. He reached out his hand and gently caressed Nangongja's face. He used his fingertips to feel the wrinkles on Nangongja's face. With a bit of warmth to the touch, Mishiro instantly felt that her heart was at peace. Even if his hand was caressing the man who had accompanied him for many years and allowed him to slowly grow up, Mishiro's heart didn't have any meaningless feelings at all. Instead, he felt a little heartache for this man. Because although Nangongja's face still looked young and handsome, compared to the first time he saw Nangongja, the tiredness in his eyes was so strong that it was difficult to ignore. "Mishiro?" Mishiro's eyes were filled with undisguised heartache. Nangongja naturally saw it clearly. "You don't have to say that. At that time, I also left with leave for various reasons and accepted the seemingly absurd and strange task of traveling around the ninja world with you. At that time, I was just like an injured beast, eager to leave the place I originally lived and avoid the people I knew. But it was because I met you at that time that I mustered up the courage to face all the things I should face. At that time, if it wasn't for you, I would have already lost my life in that jungle. It was you who brought me to find a Wang and gave me a chance to continue living. So, there is no so-called debt between you and me. From the moment you saved my life, you're already my family. For my family, I'm willing to face anything no matter what. Nangongzhi and Mishiro's eyes collided at this moment. The strong friendship in their eyes couldn't be ignored, but Mishiro suddenly moved his eyes away. He picked up the spoon again, his eyes were a little evasive. He used his spoon to point at Nangongzhi's taste dish and said, "The taste is okay, right? If it's okay, I will give you a bowl first. After eating, go and have a good rest. After all, you should have experienced a lot of dangerous things last night." Nangongzhi's expression was a little sluggish, but he still said to Mishiro, "Oh? The taste is very good, I can definitely sleep well after eating the porridge." Mishiro took out a wooden bowl from the cupboard and gave Nangongzhi a bowl of porridge. He scattered a little bit of seaweed and sesame seeds on the porridge, making the porridge look more delicious. Without waiting for Nangongzhi to say anything, Mishiro turned around and walked away. Looking at Mishiro's back, Nangongzhi wanted to say something, but he still closed his mouth. After all, inviting Mishiro himself and Little Linger to visit the grave of Ah Wang, who once saved them and had a close relationship with the three of them, wasn't in a hurry to inform Mishiro. After all, there were still some things that needed to be prepared. Right now, his relationship with Watergate was superficial. If he brought Little Linger and Mishiro to the village, leaving only Nangongro in the wood leaf, Nangongzhi wouldn't be so relieved. But he called Mishiro because when he was entrusted to take care of Little Linger, Mishiro was at the scene. Why would he call his sister? In order to thank Ah Wang for saving his brother so that he could continue to live with his brother. Needless to say, this reason did have some credibility. With his imagination running wild, Nangongzhi held the wooden bowl in his hand and sat on the cushion where he was sitting before. He slowly ate. Behind a wall that Nangongzhi couldn't see, Mishiro was leaning against the wall. His cheeks were blushing like rouge. Listening to Nangongzhi's praise from time to time while eating the porridge, Mishiro's blush became even more conspicuous. Chapter 336. A few days later, Nangongzhi found an opportunity to tell Mishiro that he had promised Little Linger that they would visit Ah Wang's tomb together. Mishiro was naturally very grateful to Nangongzhi for saving Ah Wang when they were in trouble. Therefore he gladly agreed to Nangongzhi's invitation. Because he was worried about his sister's safety in Woodleaf village, Nangongzhi actually went to look for Nangongro. However, Nangongro didn't seem to want to visit Ah Wang's tomb with Little Linger and Mishiro, so she made some excuses. Nangongzhi also couldn't force his sister to visit Ah Wang's tomb with him. Therefore, Nangongzhi found the people from the Blood Cloth Pavilion in Woodleaf village and directly gave them the highest level of protection. If there were any abnormalities, they could directly notify Nangongzhi through the Blood Cloth Pavilion's channels. After making these arrangements, Nangongzhi's heart was a little relieved. After greeting Watergate and pretending to be polite for a while, he directly left Woodleaf village with Little Linger and Mishiro. The village where Little Linger and Ah Wang originally lived in wasn't that close to Woodleaf village. In order to take care of Mishiro and Little Linger's speed, Nangongzhi also restrained his speed. On the road, the three of them walked for nearly half a month. In order to reminisce about the past, they even deliberately took a detour to the place where they had been before. Although Nangongzhi didn't understand this kind of sentimental behavior, since it was the request of the two girls, he naturally didn't have any objections. Looking at the familiar forest and road along the way, Nangongzhi also became a little girl like Mishiro and Little Linger. Looking at the surrounding environment, there was a little bit of sunset in the west sky. Nangongzhi waved at Mishiro and Little Linger and said, "Let's rest for a while. Let's all rest for a while. I looked around and felt that we should be able to reach Shaoling Air's village tomorrow. Let's rest here for today and set off tomorrow morning." Mishiro and Little Linger also looked at the sky and knew that it was indeed time to set up camp and rest. Thus, they nodded and walked to where Nangongzhi was standing. They seemed to be very familiar with the most basic things like setting up a tent. The few of them were already very familiar with the process and naturally they finished setting up the camp quickly. They even started a bonfire to make food and drive away the beasts that might be lurking around the camp at night. Although to Nangongzhi and the others, beasts weren't anything threatening, it was still quite annoying to have a beast come out to disturb them while they were sleeping soundly. The slightly orange-red flames of the bonfire danced on the wood, as if a female singer in a red dress was dancing gracefully. It had a natural beauty. Little Linger, who was sitting beside the bonfire, didn't seem to be as excited as the flames. Instead, she seemed to be a little quiet. Her pair of eyes were slightly absent-minded as she stared at the bonfire. However, no one knew where her thoughts had drifted to. Humans actually had many common problems. For example, when they were angry, they would lose their rationality. When they were intoxicated by love, they would become confused. When they stood next to their hometown, they would always have a feeling that they didn't dare to approach. They were afraid that their hometown would become different from their impression of it. They were afraid that many people who used to be familiar with them would forget about them. This kind of feeling was called timid when one is close to home. It was a very normal thing. Nangongja took a blanket and quietly sat beside Little Linger. He gently placed his hand on Little Linger's shoulder. Little Linger was slightly dazed before she reacted. She looked at Nangongja and asked with some doubts, "Brother Nangong, what's the matter? Did Mashiro Jeje need my help to cook?" Although Little Linger wasn't that good at cooking, she would occasionally help Mashiro and Nangong row at home. She could be considered to be experienced in the kitchen. Therefore, when she saw Nangongja suddenly appear beside her, Little Linger immediately thought that it was Mashiro who asked Nangongja to come over to help cook. Nangongja shook his head and denied Little Linger's question. He then opened the blanket in his hand and draped it over Little Linger's shoulder. He gently said, "The temperature in the forest is quite cold at night. Although it's near the bonfire, you still need to wear more clothes. Wouldn't it be bad if you catch a cold?" Little Linger looked at the blanket that Nangongja draped over her body. She seemed to dislike the blanket that Nangongja hastily draped over her body. Therefore, she rearranged her little body and completely wrapped herself in the blanket. Only her two small hands could be seen grabbing the edge of the blanket tightly. However, Nangongja could still see that Little Linger's body was slightly trembling even after being wrapped in such a thick blanket. The reason for her trembling naturally wasn't because of the night breeze, but because of Little Linger's own heart. It had been more than 10 years since she left this remote village. That Little Linger from back then had grown into a beautiful and charming girl. However, this also meant that she hadn't seen her grandfather's burial ground for more than 10 years. The deep sense of self-blame that had been suppressed in her heart was like a pile of stones that weighed down on Little Linger's heart. For a moment she actually felt a little breathless. Just a little bit more and she would be able to see her grandfather's resting place. However, Little Linger's heart wasn't filled with joy. Instead, she had a feeling of escaping. As time passed, this feeling became more and more intense. "Don't be afraid." Little Linger could feel the corners of her eyes turning moist. Her legs were also slightly trembling. Suddenly, a gentle voice sounded in Little Linger's ears. Nangongja was still looking at the dancing flames above the bonfire. However, Little Linger knew that the person who spoke was definitely her brother Nangong, who had accompanied her for more than 10 years. He had watched her grow from a child to where she was today. Trembling, Little Linger inhaled a little of the cold air in the forest. Then, she probed Nangongja and said, "But," the hand that was originally on Little Linger's shoulder lightly patted Little Linger's shoulder. Nangongja finally turned his face to face with Little Linger and said, "Don't be afraid. No matter what, aren't I and your Mashiro sister still here with you? So Little Linger, don't be afraid. Since you're here, you should do what you're supposed to do." Chapter 337. The night quietly slipped away from Nangongja and company's dreams. When Little Linger opened her eyes, she discovered that her brother Nangong was already packing their luggage. Sister Mashiro had already prepared breakfast and seemed to be waiting for her. Coming to visit her grandfather's grave was Little Linger's own request. Although Nangongja and Mashiro were indebted to Awang, the reason why they were able to sleep in such a remote place was because of her own request. Even if it was just this, it would not allow him to shrink back. "I must face these things that I should face in the first place. Are you awake? Come on, it's time for breakfast." Sensing that Little Linger had woken up, Mashiro revealed a motherly smile. She waved towards Little Linger and called Little Linger over for breakfast. Little Linger stood up and tidied up her sleeping bag. She sat beside Mashiro and began to enjoy some mushrooms and wild herbs that seemed to be found in the surrounding forest. Although the taste wasn't that pleasant, the smell of the mountain assaulted her senses. While eating, Little Linger looked at Nangongja's busy figure and asked Mashiro, "Why is brother Nangong still working? Did he eat breakfast?" Hearing Little Linger's question, Mashiro's face carried a trace of anger. She glanced at Nangongja and said to Little Linger, "You don't know. This morning before you woke up, your brother Nangong's gluttonous illness acted up. He directly shook me awake and insisted on having some mountain delicacies. Once this guy started to be gluttonous, there was no limit. He actually acted cute and pestered me. I really couldn't win against him, so I could only find some mushrooms and wild herbs to make breakfast. Perhaps to make up for his loss of composure this morning, he is currently packing our luggage. Although Zhenbai's tone was full of complaints, Ling Er didn't feel that Zhenbai was truly angry. Instead, she quietly moved her little mouth close to Zhenbai's ear and used a voice that only the two of them could hear to whisper to Zhenbai, "Sister Mishiro, you are so stubborn. This morning when Brother Nangong woke you up, pestered you and annoyed you, you might have been happy." After being exposed by little Linger, who was younger than her by many years, even Mishiro couldn't react in time. Her face turned pink. She lightly patted little Linger's head and softly reprimanded little Linger. "What nonsense are you saying? If you continue like this, then go and accompany your brother Nangong to pack our luggage. The two of you can wait for the food to get cold before you eat it." Hearing Mishiro's disguised threat, little Linger quickly shut her mouth. Her cheeks puffed up and she was like a little hamster as she quickly devoured her food. Although Nangongja was also very envious of Mishiro and little Linger being able to enjoy their food, he still happily watched Mishiro and little Linger eating together. Although their age difference wasn't big, little Linger and Mishiro's relationship was as warm as that of a mother and daughter. Breakfast passed in such a noisy manner. Nangongja had just finished packing and received Mishiro's warm wild vegetable and mushroom porridge. At this point there were almost no common roads. Most of the roads were man-made livestock or small paths that the residents walked on. After walking for half a day in the forest that was filled with shrubs and trees, Nangongja and the other two were still surrounded by green trees. They couldn't tell where they were at all. However, Linger, who had lived here since she was a child, clearly knew that she was about to reach her destination. Her originally heavy footsteps had unknowingly become light and graceful. Her footsteps were like a joyful jump. Little Linger directly overtook Nangongja, who was leading the way, and walked forward. However, Nangongja frowned slightly because Nangongja could vaguely feel the excessive moisture in the soil and air. There were also some remnants of chakra. After careful observation, Nangongja discovered that this chakra was different from normal chakra. It was filled with a primitive and violent aura. If he had to find an analogy, Nangongja felt that only a chibi and Nine-Tails chakra aura was similar to this aura. Was it a tailed beast? Nangongja sensed something and quickly increased his speed. He pulled Mishiro and dashed towards the direction little Linger was heading. Although Mishiro did not know why Nangongja was suddenly so anxious, he still followed Nangongja's pull and dashed towards little Linger's direction. Soon Nangongja and Mishiro left the dense forest. Bright sunlight and a wide space appeared in front of them. However, little Linger was standing on top of a mound without saying a word. Even if she sensed Nangongja and Mishiro's arrival, she did not react at all. Because of the mound, Nangongja did not know what was in front of him. Thus, he let go of Mishiro's hand and walked forward to stand on top of the mound where little Linger was. Looking around, the originally peaceful little village was no longer the same as Nangongja remembered. One by one, the wooden houses had already collapsed and there were still huge holes in them. Although it seemed that a certain amount of rescue had been carried out, some of the puddles were still a little red with blood. Looking at little Linger beside him, little Linger's face was so dull, but drops of tears kept overflowing from little Linger's eyes. Nangongja looked at little Linger, his heart was also very sad. He stretched out his hand and hugged little Linger in his arms, slowly stroking little Linger's back with his hand. "No. It's gone, everything is gone." "What? Obviously this place is so remote that it's meaningless to any country or village, but it's still invaded? What? Why? In Nangongja's embrace, the grief that Linger had been suppressing all this while was completely unleashed. The mournful screams were like a sharp knife piercing Nangongja's heart. When did little Linger become like this? No matter who it is, he must make them pay with blood. Nangongja quietly made such a vow in his heart. Chapter 338. While hugging little Linger, Nangongja suddenly noticed a little movement in the forest on his left. After nodding to little Linger and Mishiro behind him, Nangongja let go of little Linger in his arms. The power under his feet instantly erupted, and his whole body was like a huge bird flying through the sky, rushing straight into the forest. After entering the forest, the obvious man-made traces on the ground became more and more conspicuous. However, Nangongja still had some doubts in his heart, because according to the usual behavior of a ninja, in such a place where there were no obvious paths and trees, one would generally rely on one's physical advantage and a certain amount of chakra's assistance to move between the branches. But now, Nangongja could see that most of the traces were on the ground, and they were very obvious. Obviously they weren't covered up properly. This kind of trace didn't seem like the quality of a ninja, and it was very likely that it was left behind by an ordinary person. But considering the miserable situation of the village and the aura of the tailed beast, Nangongja felt that he shouldn't let down his guard, so he also took out the Heaven's Disaster Sword and its scabbard, and slowed down his speed. While slowly moving forward, Nangongja's hand that was holding the Heaven's Disaster Sword's hilt also slowly became tighter and tighter. Suddenly, Nangongja suddenly pulled out his sword. The Heaven's Disaster Sword didn't leave its scabbard, but directly slashed towards a big tree behind Nangongja. After a moment, the big tree fell down, and Nangongja's figure was already standing behind the fallen tree. A man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, wearing rough clothes, was sitting on the ground, paralyzed with fear. Although Nangongja's Heaven's Disaster Sword was wrapped in the scabbard, it was pointed directly at the man's throat. On the man's body, the hair on his body stood up. Obviously, even if the Heaven's Disaster Sword was dormant in the scabbard, it was still dangerous for Nangongja. The man's eyes stared straight at the Heaven's Disaster Sword in Nangongja's hand, and his eyes were a little numb. It was a kind of numbness that was filled with fear. The man's body was slightly trembling, and his mouth was muttering something. Nangongja tried his best to listen carefully. Finally he heard what the man was saying. "Don't kill me. Monster. Monster. Don't hurt my family. I'll kill you. Fight. Girl, what's wrong with you? Don't scare father, open your eyes, don't fall asleep. My home. It's gone. It's gone." Gradually, the man who was still staring blankly at Nangongja's scabbard held his head tightly, and the murmuring voice turned into a heart-wrenching roar. The kind of man who lost everything he cherished, who clearly hoped that he could accompany his everything to disappear, was lucky and unlucky to continue living in this world. Poor man. Different from before, Nangongja's heart quietly began to breed a kind of emotion called pity. Didn't he also lose everything he was familiar with? Although he was still young at that time and might not have felt such strong emotions, he would have been driven by the strong desire for revenge in his heart. If he wasn't careful, he might have walked on a path of self-destruction. In that case, wasn't the seal that was engraved on his body a good way to maintain his original heart? Nangongja was actually very satisfied with the days he was living with his sister Nangong-ro, Mashiro, and Little Linger. The extreme emotions that he originally had because he was deceived and coaxed had already disappeared for the current Nangongja. Therefore, Nangongja was filled with sympathy for this man who had a similar experience as him and had already embarked on the path of self-destruction. Instead of letting him torture himself in the human world, Nangongja didn't mind offering his pity to this man. "Brother Nangong. Wait." Just as Nangongja unsheathed the calamity sword in his hand, Little Linger's voice sounded behind Nangongja. Obviously she couldn't wait for Nangongja to return, so she brought Mashiro here. Little Linger. Seeing Little Linger walking over, Nangongja's eyebrows slightly knitted together. Because Nangongja didn't want Little Linger to see him killing people, he said to Little Linger in a serious tone, "Bring your sister Mashiro to the side first, I'll be done soon." After saying that, she looked at the pitiful and pathetic man who was immersed in his own world with a sharp gaze. "Brother, what I mean is that I might be able to get some useful information from him. He's a neighbor who often helped me and my grandfather when I was young." After this, Little Linger's eyes were filled with determination and sadness. "After this, I hope that big brother will be able to stop him from living such a painful life." Hearing Little Linger's words, Nangongja finally looked at the child he watched grow up. Unknowingly, Little Linger was no longer the little girl who only knew how to act coquettishly. Instead, she was a mature person who could make her own decisions. He nodded and made room for Little Linger. Little Linger walked to the man's side and slowly squatted down so that she could be at the same level as the man. Little Linger tried to make her voice as soft as possible, and at the same time she used some of the illusion principles she learned in the ninja school. Finally she opened her mouth. "Uncle. I know that you're very sad right now, but you can't immerse yourself in sadness like this, right?" Little Linger's voice sounded very ethereal, as if it came from the end of the sky. However, after listening carefully, it sounded like she was whispering in his ear. It was this extremely conflicting feeling that made the man whose thoughts were in a mess at this moment, a trace of clarity appeared in his eyes. Chapter 339. I shouldn't be sad? The man muttered to himself, "No. My family, my home was destroyed. Why shouldn't I be sad? My home, my daughter. No, no, no." Although it didn't achieve the desired effect, There was no doubt that Ling Er's words had actually torn a small crack in this man's heart. As long as they used the right method to guide him, it wasn't impossible to make this somewhat crazy man reveal the information they needed. Looking at little Linger, who was calmly observing the man's expression and reaction, Nangongja suddenly had a small plan for little Linger's future. However, now wasn't the time to think about this. The most important thing now was to obtain some useful information from this crazy man. Yes, of course you can be sad, because you've already lost everything that you cherish. But is grief enough for you? Whether it's the death of your family or the destruction of your home, it wasn't because of you. It was because of something else, wasn't it? Are you really willing to let something like that go to another place and let others suffer the same pain as you? I know you're a kind person, but do you really want others to suffer the same fate as you, to have their families torn apart and their families destroyed? Following the man's words, little Linger began to guide the man with her chakra-enhanced voice. She hoped that the man could recall the scene at that time. Even if it was just a few words, it could at least provide clues for Nangongja. I don't want to. This kind of suffering, this kind of sadness shouldn't exist in this world. While speaking, the man suddenly grabbed his head with a pained expression. It was obvious that he was recalling the scene in front of his eyes when he was in the most pain. Don't panic, you are safe now. That monster has already left you. Now he is an illusion. You just need to tell me, what did you see? Little Linger signaled Nangongja with her eyes. Nangongja slowly walked behind the man and pointed his index finger at the back of the man's head. He tried his best to make his internal energy gentle and infused it into the man's body, hoping that the man wouldn't fall into the fear in his heart. That's a huge monster. It's covered in spikes and looked very scary. But this monster seems to be afraid of something, and it's running away in a certain direction in terror. Perhaps it was because of the internal energy, or perhaps it was because of little Linger's guidance. Although the man's body was still trembling slightly, he was able to speak clearly. What are the characteristics of this monster have? Imitating the way little Linger guided the man, Nangongja also tried his best to make his voice as soft as possible, and used his internal energy to simulate little Linger's voice. Seeing how easily Nangongja did it, little Linger wasn't too excited, because these things were actually written in the ninja school textbooks. If it wasn't for the fact that this man knew her and had a relatively good relationship with her, and that this man was mentally exhausted and broken due to excessive grief, this little trick definitely wouldn't have had such an outstanding effect. It looks like a huge tortoise. But it has 3 tails that are obviously different from a tortoise, and its shell also has many spikes. Tortoise, 3 tails? Among the bijou, only one has such characteristics, and that is the Sanbai Isabu that once belonged to the Mist Village. This bijou was originally used by the Mist as a means to deal with the wood leaf, and it was sealed in the body of Kakashi's teammate, Watergate's disciple, Noera Rin. In order to prevent Rin, who didn't have the qualifications to become a Jinchuriki and couldn't suppress the bijou in her body from being expelled to Konoha's territory, Hatake Kakashi personally used his own unique ninjutsu to kill his own teammate. Tailed beasts were creatures that could only be sealed, not destroyed. Although the Sanbai shared some of the effects of Harano Rin's death because it was sealed inside her body, it was still resurrected over the years and became the only wild-tailed beast known to exist. In the information from the Blood Cloak Pavilion, the information about the Sanbai ended here. Combined with some of the things that Kakashi said to him, Nangongja can probably determine that the Sanbai has indeed been successfully resurrected. But this place is indeed very far from the place where Kakashi killed Rin. According to some records, the Sanbai Isabu is not so willing to leave the place where it was born. You just said, this monster doesn't look like it's here to wreak havoc, but it's running away? As if he grasped the key of the problem, Nangongja continued to ask the man again. The man nodded a little woodenly and then said, this monster is indeed running away. The scene is exactly the same as when I was hunting prey. Did you see clearly what the person who was chasing the monster looked like? Nangongja nodded, slightly confirming his inner judgment, and then asked. He was just floating in the air. With just a wave of his hand, the huge monster was sent flying. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he had very conspicuous hair and he seemed to be wearing black with red patterns, black. While talking, the man's eyes suddenly began to spin rapidly, and his heartbeat became very fast. In just a moment, the man had already fainted. It seems that his emotions were forcibly suppressed, causing his body to be unable to withstand such emotional suppression and self-protection. Looking at the man's situation, Nangongja also quickly said his judgment. Little Linger nodded, naturally knowing that Nangongja was telling the truth. With a little sadness in her eyes, as well as suppressed anger, Little Linger slowly stepped back. When Mashiro saw Little Linger coming over, he immediately took Little Linger's hand and walked to the other side, obviously wanting to counsel Little Linger. Nangongja naturally slowly unsheathed the tribulation sword in his hand again. Chapter 340. When Nangongja once again stood in front of Little Linger and Mashiro, although there was no blood on his sword, there was still a very faint smell of blood. At the foot of Nangongja's shoes, there was some exceptionally moist soil that clearly wasn't from the surface. With a slightly inquiring gaze, Mashiro secretly glanced at Nangongja. Nangongja nodded towards Mashiro, obviously telling Mashiro that he had already dealt with the pitiful man. Looking at Little Linger, who was being gently hugged by Mashiro, although she was no longer crying, her shoulders were still trembling. It was obvious that her emotions weren't that stable. Nangongja helplessly shook his head. After all, these matters had to be resolved by one's own heart first. No matter how much others said, it wasn't as useful as thinking clearly on one's own. Who is he? Little Linger struggled out of Mashiro's embrace. Although she was slightly shorter than Nangongja, she still raised her head and looked straight into Nangongja's eyes. Her eyes were slightly red and swollen. It was obvious that Little Linger must have cried just now. However, Nangongja saw an extremely dense anger and unwillingness in those red and swollen eyes. Nangongja didn't wish to see such emotions in Little Linger's eyes. He had also been affected by such emotions before, so he was very clear about how dangerous such emotions were. Even if I tell you, what can you do? Walk in front of this person and offer up your life without any resistance. This was the first time Nangongja used such a tone towards Little Linger. Usually, Nangongja could be said to be extremely doting towards Little Linger. Sometimes even Nangongro would ask Nangongja with a sour tone who he treated as his sister. However, now that Nangongja directly said such harsh words to Little Linger, it made Little Linger unable to react for a moment. Even if the price is my life, I will avenge my hometown. Although Little Linger was surprised, she still looked at Nangongja stubbornly and said such words. Nangongja's heart was suddenly filled with a kind of anger, and the blood in his veins flowed faster. Little Linger. No, Nangongling. Do you think that your life is something that you can give up so easily? Nangongja took a small step forward, and the pressure that was hidden in his body was instantly released. Little Linger had seen Nangongja release his pressure to others more than once, but this was the first time she personally felt the full pressure from Nangongja. Although Mashiro, who was standing at the side, was not the main target of Nangongja's pressure, he was also affected to a certain extent. Mashiro, who did not have any cultivation, reacted even worse than Little Linger. Her face became pale, and her eyes were somewhat unfocused. Her legs were also slightly trembling. Little Linger also did not feel good at this moment. In her eyes, Nangongja was no longer the brother Nangong who usually smiled gently at her. Instead, he was an executioner who emitted a thick and difficult to disperse smell of blood. Could this be the true attitude of her brother Nangong? For the first time, Little Linger understood that Nangongja's title of Yama was not given to her for no reason. Knowing that Little Linger and Mashiro were affected by his pressure, Nangongja felt that it was about time to release his killing intent and evil aura back into his body. Little Linger. Is death really as fearless as you said? Nangongja walked to Little Linger's side and placed his hand on Little Linger's shoulder. He looked straight into Little Linger's eyes and said, "Although I have experienced many life and death situations and have taken many lives, I have never dared to look down on anyone's life. This is because I know that I am also afraid of death. Death has always been a problem that humans have always tried to avoid. Many people say that they are not afraid of death. For their own ideals, for their own perseverance, they are willing to die. However, when death really came to a person, that kind of instinctive fear was something that couldn't be resisted at all. The reason why I am so angry this time is not because you are obsessed with seeking justice for the destruction of your hometown. It is because you view your life so lowly. You have never been alone. You have me, your sister Rower, and your sister Mashiro by your side. We have always been concerned about you. If you were to throw away your life so easily, have you thought about how much pain we would feel in our hearts? Indeed, you have grown up and have a certain level of judgment and execution. However, the relationship between people wasn't something that one could have a deeper understanding of just by age alone. This time, my actions were a little rough, but I hope you can understand that since I have already seen you as a mature person, then in the future I will not give you endless tolerance. Instead, I will reprimand you should accept it." After speaking, Nangongja directly walked past Little Linger's figure and headed towards the ruined village. Mishiro also seemed to have recovered from Nangongja's rough coercion. She slowly walked to Little Linger's side and placed her hand on Little Linger's head. Then she slowly embraced Little Linger. Little Linger, Miyagi's words were indeed a little overboard. However, I think that with your intelligence you should understand, right? If it wasn't for Miyagi treating you as a family member and wanting you to grow up, he would definitely not show such an abnormal emotion, right? Mishiro and Little Linger had lived together with Nangongja for so many years. Naturally, they understood that Nangongja was usually a slightly dull and even somewhat taciturn person. However, this time Nangongja showed such a rare anger. This was enough to prove that Little Linger occupied an important position in Nangongja's heart. Let's not talk about how Mishiro comforted Little Linger. At this moment, Nangongja had already arrived at the ruined village. Although there was only a faint trace of chakra in the air, Nangongja could still find some traces left behind by the use of ninjutsu. There were pools of water, ice shards in the corners of houses, and traces of sharp objects on the trees and houses. These were all important evidence for Nangongja to judge the participants. Chapter 341. Although Nangongja didn't agree to let Little Linger seek revenge, but Nangongja was still very grateful to Awang for saving his life. This village was the former residence of Awang, and also the place where his bones were buried. The purpose of the three of them coming here was to pay respects to Awang, but now they couldn't even find Awang's grave. Nangongja was also very angry and very sad. So this kind of thing must not be ignored so easily. Judging from the traces on the ground, the ninjutsu used by the two sides should include ice, water and wind attributes, these three types of chakra. But these three types of attributes didn't bring about the effect of floating in the air like the crazy uncle said. From the information Nangongja once read, Isabu was a tailed beast with these three types of attributes. So, can we assume that the person who forced Isabu to flee for his life didn't use any of these three types of attributes? Many people say that tailed beasts are actually monsters created by the self-consciousness of chakra, although there is no evidence to prove this point, but at least it shows that the use and control of chakra is much better than the average ninja. Relying on the attributes of a tailed beast to attack a tailed beast, how can such behavior be realized? And wearing black clothes with red lines on it, according to Nangongja's knowledge in the entire ninja world, I am afraid that only the Akatsuki which has conflicts with him and also cooperates with him, and even the Akatsuki which he planted a nail in his back. Fighting against a tailed beast alone, and even having the upper hand, such a person must be extremely famous in the ninja world, and only the Akatsuki can do such a thing and hide such a strong person quietly without anyone knowing. Taking out a scroll from his arms, he directly tore it open. After a cloud of smoke rose, a black crow has already appeared on Nangongja's shoulder. After Nangongja whispered a few words to the crow on his shoulder, the crow directly turned into pieces of black feathers and disappeared without a trace. Seeing that the crow has disappeared, Nangongja also nodded and returned to Little Linger and Mishiro's side. Brother Nangong. I was wrong. No matter what, I shouldn't take my life so lightly. But those people who have lived with me for many years and the place where my grandfather rested, all of them were destroyed because of the so-called monster and the godlike man floating in the air. I really can't bear this. After saying that, Little Linger also showed her strong unwillingness. Nangongja naturally knew what kind of temperament Little Linger has. Perhaps after being persuaded by Mishiro for so long, she indeed gave up the impulsive plan of going alone to seek revenge, but she will absolutely not give up on seeking revenge. Well, you don't have to worry about these things. I have my own plans. I will certainly not let those unscrupulous people be so free. Even if there is no way to directly kill them, at least there is no problem in causing trouble for them. Nangongja knew that he was going to face the Akatsuki. Although his strength has also reached the Kage level in the ninja world, but the people of Akatsuki also have their own unique skills, and their advantages are not inferior to the Kage level powerhouses. Of course, he can't just foolishly run up to them, so it seems that the only thing he can do is to cause trouble for them. Previously, the disciple of the Bloodcloth Pavilion who came here to remove the grave wrote the location of the grave in the report. It is a little far from the location of this village. If we are lucky enough, the grave of a Wang should be fine. Let's first go to the grave of a Wang, and then see how to take revenge for the people in this village, okay? When Nangongja said that a Wang's grave may be fine, Little Linger's eyes began to shine. Her grandfather's rest has not been disturbed yet? Little Linger's heart at the moment was filled with joy like wild grass. Obviously she hoped that Nangongja can take her to see a Wang's grave. Walking to the side of Little Linger, Nangongja gently took Little Linger's hand, and slowly walked with little Linger in a direction. Mashiro naturally followed behind little Linger and Nangongja, and with a little doubt he looked at Nangongja who was leading the way for little Linger. Mashiro also participated in the management of the blood cloth pavilion, and it happened that the report about a Wang's grave was actually from Mashiro's hands. Mashiro still had some vague impression about the records, although he didn't remember where a Wang's grave was, but he was sure that a Wang's grave was not in the direction where Nangongja took little Linger. After walking for a while, whether it was the strong smell of blood or the scene of destruction in the village, they all disappeared without a trace, and it became the same as the forest they had been passing through, ordinary and without any special characteristics. A tombstone carved out of bluestone appeared in front of Nangongja and little Linger. On the tombstone was written, "A Wang's grave," which was obviously a grave for a Wang who had never revealed his true name. Little Linger burst into tears the moment she saw a Wang's tombstone. She hugged a Wang's grave and cried non-stop while talking about her experiences over the years, repeatedly expressing her self-blame for not coming back to see a Wang. However, Mashiro quietly pulled Nangongja to the side and pointed at the grave that Nangongja called a Wang's grave. "This isn't a Wang's real grave, right? What did you do?" Nangongja pressed his index finger on Mashiro's lips, hinting Mashiro not to disturb little Linger. He then lowered his voice and said to Mashiro, "No matter if it's the tombstone or the coffin, they all belong to a Wang. I also read the report about a Wang's grave. After confirming some things, I directly went to a Wang's grave and found that it was also affected and very miserable. Therefore, I immediately brought a Wang's coffin out and brought this tombstone here to be buried. It took me a lot of time to arrange such an old scene." After listening to Nangongja's words, Mashiro naturally understood that Nangongja did this to appease the hatred and anger in little Linger's heart, which was why he did this extremely disrespectful act. Hopefully, a Wang could also understand Nangongja's painstaking efforts. Chapter 342. In the end, after paying their respects to Ah Wang, Nangongja and the others returned to the wood leaf. However, the three of them couldn't let go of the things that happened in little Linger's village. Every time they avoided Nangongja and Mashiro, little Linger would always be in a daze. No one knew what she was thinking. As for Nangongja, although he repeatedly said that he would take action, he didn't do anything at all. Little Linger naturally believed that Nangongja would do what he said, but believing was one thing. Nangongja's repeated delays made little Linger understand the difficulty and seriousness of this matter. After returning to the wood leaf, little Linger also immersed herself in the public library of the wood leaf to read a lot of information. She could also determine that the monster that escaped from the mouth of the somewhat crazy uncle was one of the nine-tailed beasts, Isabu. How could a person who could chase a tailed beast away be someone that could be easily dealt with? Little Linger even ran to Nangongja's side and told Nangongja that he didn't need Nangongja to seek revenge. However, Nangongja just smiled and shook his head without saying anything. Nangongja's stubbornness, or rather stubbornness, was something that Linger naturally knew very well. In order for Nangongja to avenge those who had already died and weren't close to her, she felt that it wasn't worth it to risk her brother's life. However, Nangongja seemed to be stubborn. He didn't even consider giving up. She didn't know if it was purely because of the destruction of the village or if there were other deeper reasons. In the middle of the night, the bright moon hid its appearance in the dark clouds. The originally cold moonlight was completely hidden at this moment. Nangongja, on the other hand, was neatly dressed and walked towards the forest outside Konoha. Although there was a barrier around the wood leaf, it was only designed to prevent ninjas from reaching Kage-tier. At Nangongja's level, he could completely hide his whereabouts at specific nodes and not be discovered by the barrier. Nangongja was surrounded by tall trees. Because it was late at night, whether it was insects or birds, they seemed to have fallen asleep at this moment. The surroundings were silent. Nangongja could clearly hear his own breathing and heartbeat in his ears. Suddenly, a crow appeared on a big tree. The crow was very ordinary, its feathers didn't reflect light, but its eyes were very unusual. This was because it had a pair of 3 Tomo Sharingan. Caw, caw, caw. When the crow saw Nangongja, it made a very strange sound. Nangongja also nodded his head as if to tell the crow that the surroundings were safe. The crow's eyes turned in a circle, then it directly spread its wings and flew down from the branch. Like sand being swept away by a gust of wind, the crow turned into a clump of feathers that far exceeded its original size. The feathers gathered in front of Nangongja, and slowly a human figure was piled up by the feathers. When the feathers scattered, a person wearing the Akatsuki's black robe with red clouds and 3 tomo in his eyes appeared in front of Nangongja. These years, Itachi had been in the Akatsuki organization. As the Akatsuki organization's multifaceted spy to Woodleaf's relationship to Akatsuki organization, and Nangongja's relationship to Akatsuki organization, the huge pressure seemed to make Itachi's appearance more weary. Don't know whether it was an illusion or not, but Nangongja always felt that Itachi's eyes were not so bright, as if he was extremely tired. Now is the time of trouble, you suddenly came to find me, I hope you are not looking for something boring. Itachi's tone was somewhat cold, but Nangongja was very clear about Itachi's situation. In the Akatsuki organization, there was a certain amount of suspicion towards Itachi. For a long time, the Akatsuki organization used Itachi as a knife in their hand, and didn't let him come in contact with any of the Akatsuki organization's confidential information. Even if he accidentally learned some things, most of them were some unimportant or vague information. The Akatsuki organization also sent a lot of diversion to Woodleaf through Itachi more than once. Although it was true, it was not so important information. At the moment, Woodleaf was under the rule of the 4th Hokage Watergate. The Akatsuki organization was the organization that once hurt Watergate's wife and children. Even before, in order to find information about the Akatsuki organization, Watergate even abandoned his responsibility as Hokage and directly ran to the ninja world to investigate for a period of time. It's conceivable that when Watergate knew that Woodleaf actually placed his own nail in this organization, how anxious Watergate's heart will be, and how great the pressure on Itachi will become. Danzo has been expelled. Seeing Itachi, Nangongja didn't talk about himself first. Instead, he talked about the common enemy he had to face when he and Itachi reached an alliance. Your parents are safe now, and Sasuke has also left Woodleaf's range. Although you are now in Orochimaru's base, but considering your restraint on Orochimaru, it's easy to take Sasuke away. Don't you want to take your parents and brother away from the world and live a quiet life? At this moment, Itachi's face was still cold. That kind of cold temperament seemed to accompany Itachi since he was born. But Nangongja could clearly see the very obvious fluctuations in Itachi's eyes. For Nangongja's words, Itachi himself was actually moved. But soon Itachi adjusted his mentality. After so many years of spy life, if there is really any significant growth in Itachi, I'm afraid it's only the effect of hiding his true feelings. I still can't do this. Itachi lightly shot a glance at Nangongja as if he was looking at the devil in his heart, with both fear and a little bit of uncontrollable desire. If this matter could be solved like this before I joined Akatsuki, I would definitely abandon everything and live together with my family. But you have read some of the information I gave you. Akatsuki is not just an organization that wants to be the first mercenary organization in the ninja world. Although their conspiracy is hidden from me, I can still know that this is a terrible move that affects the ninja world and even the whole world. Before becoming Itachi Uchiha, I was a Woodleaf ninja. Even if there is a crack on my forehead, I am still a Woodleaf ninja, Itachi Uchiha. Chapter 343. When Itachi said that he was still a Woodleaf ninja Itachi Uchiha, Nangongja could easily perceive that Itachi's whole spirit had changed. Although he was also born in Woodleaf, but compared to Nangongja who was born and raised in Woodleaf, he couldn't understand the pride of being a Woodleaf ninja. But not understanding doesn't mean that Nangongja has any prejudice against such a Itachi Uchiha. On the contrary, Nangongja appreciated this kind of Itachi very much. Because Itachi's almost blind loyalty to Woodleaf is actually the same as Nangongja's unconditional protection and trust for his family. Little Linger, Mashiro, and Nangongro are Nangongja's spiritual sustenance, and Woodleaf is naturally Itachi's spiritual sustenance. In the end, Nangongja and Itachi are somewhat similar in some aspects. This is one of the reasons why the two still cooperate very smoothly even though they don't have a deep friendship. Speaking of Akatsuki, have you started the operation against Bijou again during this time? I also know that this matter involves Bijou, so I must ask you to meet me in person. Bijou is really a sensitive matter. Nangongja looked at Itachi and finally asked his question. For the ninja world, Bijou is no different from a strategic resource. Just like the nuclear weapons between various countries, it is a weapon full of deterrence. After all, as long as Column Force doesn't reveal the aura of Bijou in his body, almost no one can detect it. Once a war breaks out, Bijou Column Force can easily sneak into the strategic towns of other countries and directly release the power of Bijou in his body to wreak havoc. After that, Chakra can directly put away the Bijou and leave easily. And the Akatsuki organization's desire for bijou is much more than those countries and villages. Not to mention anything else, would anyone stand against Konoha just because they want to take the Kyubi into their own hands? If it was someone else, perhaps everyone would raise their middle finger and praise them as idiot, but Akatsuki really did so and even caused a lot of damage to the wood leaf. The Akatsuki has taken action against the tailed beasts? After hearing Nangongja's words, Itachi didn't react for a while. As soon as he saw Itachi's reaction, Nangongja knew that Itachi didn't know about this operation. Therefore, Nangongja told him about the crazy man he met when he went to Little Linger's hometown. Floating in the air, attacking with a wave of his hand, striking hair color. Itachi began to recite the main points of the characteristics that Nangongja had mentioned. His eyes also began to slowly turn piercingly cold. Sure enough, this person isn't an ordinary person in the Akatsuki organization. If you are sure that the crazy man you just said is the truth, in the Akatsuki organization, there is only one person who fits the characteristics you just described, and that is the leader of the organization, God, Pain. This person's identity is also very suspicious. In the information you gave me before, there are 3 founding elders of Akatsuki, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan. This Pain who has always been the leader of Akatsuki is very similar to the description you gave me about Yahiko, but you and I both know that as the original leader of Akatsuki, Yahiko has already died in the hands of Shimura Danzo and Hanzo the Salamander. On the contrary, the person named Nagato has never appeared in front of me, which makes me very confused. Nagato. Yahiko. Nangongja suddenly felt that he seemed to have touched upon a very interesting truth, and looking at Itachi's appearance, it was obvious that he had some doubts. In that case, it seems that the Akatsuki organization has been hiding from you to drive away the tailed beast to a certain extent. From your description, it is naturally not difficult to analyze that this person named Pain has the ability to fight the tailed beast alone, and from the words of the survivor, we can also know that this Sanbai Isabu is actually being chased away. So, can we assume that defeating the tailed beast is not Pain's goal, but more likely he wants to drive the Sanbai to a place where he can effectively monitor it? The Sanbai itself is now in a wild state, and as the Akatsuki organization who is interested in collecting tailed beasts, it may be because of various reasons that they can't directly capture the Sanbai, but they also hope that this target can always be in their sight and easily controlled. And the Sanbai is an extremely lazy creature. Once it starts to live in a place, as long as there is enough food and no one disturbs it, it can always live in one place. So, what Pain wants to do is naturally simple, that is, to set off alone so that those who monitor the Akatsuki organization can't discover his actions, and then use his own power to forcibly drive the Sanbai away from its habitat, and along the way choose a remote place as the route to drive the Sanbai away. The village that Little Ling originally lived in was located in a remote area. The village was surrounded by dense forests, which naturally met Pain's requirements. Little Linger's village suffered an unexpected disaster, and became a small and insignificant sacrifice in Pain's action. Nangongja doesn't know Pain, but Itachi is in the Akatsuki organization, so naturally he has some understanding of Pain's philosophy. Pain has always claimed that his actions are for the eternal peace of the shinobi world, although he doesn't know what Pain is going to do, but from what Nangongja said, it is naturally not difficult to judge that Pain actually doesn't care so much about the lives of ordinary people. Itachi. Nangongja was silent for a long time and finally said to Itachi Uchiha, although we don't know the specific plan of the Akatsuki organization, but Tailed Beast must be an important part of it. So I hope you can try to find out where Pain is keeping the Sanbai in captivity. Since it is the target of his own surveillance, he will naturally send people to monitor it. Once there is a transfer of personnel, there is naturally no way to completely hide it. I need you to help me find out all the useful information. Itachi heard Nangongja's words, and also nodded very seriously. Nangongja actually just wants to make things difficult for the Akatsuki organization, so he hopes that he can destroy their plan of keeping the Sanbai in captivity. And Itachi is concerned about the huge ambition of the Akatsuki organization. He hopes that he can stop the Akatsuki organization from carrying out such a crazy plan. Obviously they have different starting points, but they are on the same path. In this way it is very interesting. Chapter 344. Whether it was Itachi or Nangongja, they were very concerned about finding the Sanbai's habitat and destroying the Akatsuki's plan. With the information provided by Itachi and the cooperation of many disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, they were gradually able to narrow down the Sanbai's location to a certain extent. Originally, the Sanbai was sealed in the body of the Woodleaf shinobi Harano Rin by the Mist shinobi. They hoped that with her special physique, the Sanbai could wreak havoc in the Woodleaf area, but they were stopped by Kakashi. The Sanbai was severely injured because of Rin's death. After that, the first trace of the Sanbai was found in a small country called the Country of Bears between the Water Country and the Country of Fire. In order to make it easier for them to monitor the Sanbai, the Rain Village must have placed the Sanbai in a relatively close position. The Sanbai itself is of the water attribute, and has a different affinity and dependence on water. Therefore, the only places suitable for the Sanbai's survival and close to the Akatsuki's sphere of influence are the Country of River, the Country of Waterfall, and the Country of Rain where the Akatsuki is located. Since the Akatsuki wasn't so eager to deal with the Sanbai, and even spent so much effort to expel the Sanbai from a remote place, it's very likely that the Sanbai wasn't confined in the Country of Rain. Therefore, Nangongjia and Itachi focused their investigation on the Country of River and the Country of Waterfall. When a large number of people are scattered, no matter how secretly the Akatsuki mobilizes people, they will still be exposed. Gradually, Nangongjia and Itachi were able to determine that the Sanbai was most likely hidden in the Country of Waterfall. First of all, the Country of Waterfall is rich in rainfall, and there are many swamps and lakes. Compared to the Country of River, the Country of Waterfall is undoubtedly more suitable for the Sanbai's long-term habitat. Second, there is the Country of Grass between the Country of Waterfall and the Country of Rain. Even if someone found the whereabouts of the Sanbai, they would only think that it was done by the neighboring countries such as the Country of Grass, Country of Frost, Country of Fire, and Country of Earth. They wouldn't put their eyes on a powerful force like the Akatsuki. After arranging some matters, Nangongjia left Woodleaf Village and headed towards the Waterfall Country. Along the way, Nangongjia used his leg strength to the extreme. From the Woodleaf in the hinterland of the Land of Fire to the Land of Waterfall, it only took him 3 days and 2 nights to cover a quarter of the distance of the shinobi world. The Waterfall Country was a country with a lot of water, so there weren't many tall trees. Instead, there were many shorter shrubs. After walking for a while, they could clearly hear the sound of flowing spring water. At this moment, Nangongjia didn't care about the dew on the shrubs. He just laid down in the shrubs and carefully observed the hidden tent in front of him. This camp was built based on the surrounding terrain and plants. Almost 3/4 of it was hidden in the soil, rocks, and trees, while the remaining 1/4 was carefully concealed by someone. If it was really a hurried glance, it would be really difficult to find the clues. Nangongjia also noticed by chance that something was wrong here. At the same time, there was a very large deep pool near the camp, so Nangongjia decided to lurk in this place and carefully observe where the people came from. Just after Nangongjia lurked in the shrubs for 2 hours, finally, a figure gradually walked into this very hidden tent. Just as this figure was about to approach the hidden tent, suddenly from 2 slightly dark corners, a figure with an Amigakure forehead appeared. Others don't know, but how could Nangongjia not know that the Amigakure has long been controlled by the Akatsuki? These ninjas with the Amigakure forehead are members of the Akatsuki. Nangongjia believed that in this hidden camp, there must be detailed information about Isabu. If he could obtain such information, then it would be more feasible to destroy Akatsuki organization's captive breeding plan. After all, for every one-tailed beast, this kind of creature was still in a kind of half-understood state. If he can get the research information about the Sanbai, then naturally, it will save a lot of unnecessary trouble, so why not? Therefore, in order to ensure that the information he wants to get is not destroyed by these ninjas, Nangongjia decided to assassinate these ninjas of the Amigakure. Looking at the ninja who seemed to come to report entered the tent after a series of checks, Nangongjia also observed a little bit of movement in many hidden places. If it is an ordinary person, it is naturally difficult to detect the reason, but Nangongjia is an experienced ninja, so it is easy to judge that these places are the distribution of some hidden sentries. Nangongjia quietly pulled out the sword behind his back from the scabbard. The dark sword ridge reflected Nangongjia's cold face. At this moment, his face has slowly emerged with a somewhat cruel smile, as if he is very excited about being able to freely hunt. If other people saw this, they will be instantly creeped out. Under the effect of exquisite movements, Nangongjia's figure instantly disappeared from the place. At this moment, Nangongjia's figure has quietly appeared in the most remote sentry post from the camp. It was similar to an ordinary sentry post. In order to prevent a person from being distracted sometimes, there are 2 ninjas in this sentry post to take care of each other. Nangongjia's figure has quietly appeared behind the 2 ninjas. Obviously, he walked step by step into the hidden sentries, but the 2 ninjas completely seemed to be unaware of anything, still staring at the area they are monitoring. At this moment, a faint layer of bloody brilliance covered Nangong's sword at the moment. This bloody brilliance is another application of his murderous aura that Nangongja explored. Then, when the sword cut into the enemy's flesh, he could directly let his killing intent enter the enemy's body, instantly suppressing all of the enemy's movements. Even if the enemy died, it would be difficult for the enemy to let out a scream. This kind of move is suitable for assassination. There will not be the slightest movement that should not appear. Moreover, the murderous aura wrapped by his internal force is also extremely difficult to detect. For a place like this, it is impossible for Akatsuki to send their own Kage-level powerhouse to guard. After all, if such a powerhouse is sent out, it is impossible to hide it from Itachi. Chapter 345. Blood was quietly spilled on the ground. Nangongja has basically eliminated all the sentries outside the Akatsuki's camp. Only the main personnel in the big tent needs to be dealt with. Nangongja also carefully observed whether there were enchantments set up around the camp. Sure enough, there were some simple and easy-to-operate enchantments to locate the enemy. Nangongja has not seen 1,000 of such barriers, but he has seen at least 800 of them. There is really nothing new about them. After a little bit of movement on several important nodes, a loophole easily appeared on the barrier. Through this loophole, Nangongja was finally able to see the whole picture of the camp. There are nearly 20 large and small tents in this camp, and roughly estimated that there are at least 100 ninjas in it. Among these people, except for the 20 ninjas he just killed in the periphery and the ninjas who were responsible for observing the Sanbai, Nangongja estimated that there should be about 50 ninjas in this camp. Nearly 100 ninjas, even if a large part of them are genin and chunin, it's already a huge force for an ordinary ninja village, but Akatsuki can directly place such a force directly here to keep an eye on the Sanbai. On the one hand, it is naturally because the Sanbai is very important to Akatsuki, and on the other hand, isn't it because Akatsuki is rich and doesn't mind such a force being idle? Still, according to his previous plan, as much as possible, silently kill the ninjas of Akatsuki, not giving them the opportunity to destroy the information, so as to find a way to destroy their captive plan. Nangongja quietly entered a tent, using his wood leaf white fang's assassination method, and constantly killing the ninjas in it, and Nangongja was also very careful to control the amount of blood he killed, making the smell of blood as vague as possible. In such a big tent, generally the weaker people were placed in the periphery, and the stronger people were placed in the middle. Nangongja also followed such an experiment, and began to eliminate these ninjas of Akatsuki organization in a circle as if he was peeling silk from a cocoon. With the passage of time, Nangongja's assassination target is also getting stronger and stronger. In order to achieve his goal, Nangongja's killing frequency has also begun to sharply decrease. Nangongja at this moment can clearly feel that his physical strength and spirit have reached an extremely exhausted state. Such a high-intensity assassination can no longer continue like this. Combined with the general strength of the ninjas he killed in this big tent, Nangongja believes that there are at most 3 Jonin ninjas in this big tent. As an internal energy practitioner who can restrain chakra to a certain extent, and his strength has also reached Kage level at this time, perhaps the most effective way to quickly kill these ninjas of Akatsuki is to directly go out and use his most proficient posture to quickly kill these ninjas of Akatsuki. After thinking for a little bit, Nangongja finally decided to directly go all out to kill all the remaining ninjas of Akatsuki. After all, the reason why he chose to assassinate just now is to let those ninjas in the periphery have no time to inform the ninjas in the big tent to destroy the key information. Now that he has almost killed all the ninjas of the periphery, naturally there is no need to worry about this aspect, so why should he use a method that he is not so proficient in to carry out this kind of mission? So, Nangongja finally came out from the shadows. His black clothes fluttered without wind, his black hair wantonly fluttered, but what is more conspicuous is still Nangongja's pair of bright eyes and the dark simple long sword in his hand. A kind of surging momentum was born from Nangongja's body, just like the center of a tornado, calmly standing in the same place, but the surrounding tents of Nangongja because of the storm formed by Nangongja's momentum. For a long time, unexpectedly no one came out from the central tent. Nangongja's heart also began to be vigilant. This situation is not what he expected. After all, Nangongja is not a professional perception ninja, although Nangongja can do this kind of thing, but he is not so proficient in it. When he found that the rest of the ninjas in the big tent all gathered to fight with him as he imagined, Nangongja also immediately became vigilant, directly unsheathing the Heaven's Disaster Sword in his hand and walked towards the biggest tent in the big tent. Using his scabbard to lift the curtain of the tent, Nangongja only saw a strangely dressed person sitting on the table of the main tent. One foot on the table, the other foot was hanging in the air casually swinging. Nangongja saw this strange person, and this strange person naturally also saw Nangongja. He seemed to be a little surprised as he stretched out his finger towards Nangongja, and the face covered by the mask with only one hole impressively revealed a 3-tomo Sharingan. A member of the Uchiha clan? Nangongja immediately judged the possible identity of this person in front of him, but he instantly denied his opinion. After all, the Uchiha clan has been exterminated and he knows the survivors. Whether it is the figure or the posture of this guy, he is not familiar with the few people he is familiar with. In the Woodleaf there is also Kakashi, who is obviously not a member of the Uchiha clan, but still has a Sharingan, isn't it? Who are you? Nangongja looked at the person in front of him with a mask, a black robe and a head of pineapple-like hair. But this person seems to have not heard Nangongja's question and the murderous intent contained in it, but directly jumped up from the table he was sitting on. He directly trotted to Nangongja's side, and at the moment the 3-tomo Sharingan swept over Nangongja's body and face, and even praised from time to time. Isn't this the famous Yama of the Woodleaf ninja world? It's rare, I didn't expect to meet such a famous person in this boring mission. It's really a pleasant surprise. Wait a minute, can I ask you to give me an autograph? After saying that, this guy actually seemed to be fumbling all over his body to find a pen and paper for Nangongja to sign. Nangongja was already somewhat angry because of the previous slaughter, and now seeing this strange guy's appearance in front of him, he was too lazy to suppress the anger in his heart for a while, and directly took out his tribulation sword and directly pierced the guy's chest. Chapter 346. The moment the Heaven's Calamity sword pierced through the strange person in front of him, Nangongja immediately pulled his sword out of the person's chest. He even exerted force with his feet and jumped back to distance himself from this strange person. What? That was because Nangongja's sword, which had clearly hit its target, did not feel real at all when it pierced into the man's body. But Nangongja could clearly perceive that the man in front of him wasn't an illusion, but a real existence. Regardless of whether this ability was a Kekkei Genkai or a unique ninjutsu, the most important thing to do now was to open up the distance between them. You. Who are you? Nangongja looked at the strange man and asked the same question. However, compared to his disdainful tone at the beginning, Nangongja's tone had become more serious. Tisk. It was obvious that the masked man was very displeased with Nangongja's attitude. I thought that the Yamaking of Konoha would be a little more interesting, but I didn't expect him to be so boring. Do you want to know who I am? It doesn't matter if I tell you. This uncle is called Hoodlum, Akatsuki's first official member candidate. Hearing Hoodlum's words, Nangongja actually didn't believe him. After all, through Itachi's information, Nangongja already knew what kind of people the Akatsuki's official members were. Except for Konan and Pain, who hadn't shown their full strength, the other official members were indeed talented in various aspects. To a certain extent, they could also be comparable to Kage-level experts. Even if they had the advantage, they still had the opportunity to defeat Kage-level experts. And this hoodlum in front of him clearly had the ability to let attacks pass through his body without causing any harm. Although he couldn't see for the time being whether this ability could let all physical and energy pass through his body, and what was the limit of this ability. But in Nangongja's opinion, a person with this kind of ability was fully qualified to become an official member of the Akatsuki, and not like what Hoodlum said, he was only a first official member candidate. But even in the face of such a strange ability, Nangongja didn't intend to shrink back. In the past few days, Nangongja also found that his behavior was becoming more and more unlike what he should be doing. Perhaps it was because of the expulsion of Danzo from Konoha, or perhaps it was because he let his 3 family-like existences leave the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the Lion Clan space that he felt was very safe. Therefore, Nangongja hoped that he could save his own life and the lives of his family. Due to various reasons, Nangongja also clearly sensed that he was beginning to weaken. The iron-blooded Yama who made people tremble in fear on the battlefield back then seemed to have quietly changed at this moment. His heart that was as hard as iron had actually begun to slowly melt. Nangongja tightly held the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand. This time he wanted to try and change it. Seemingly aware of the change in Nangongja's mentality, Hoodlum, who looked very sloppy just a moment ago, also slowly straightened his slightly bowed body. One of his hands also slowly pulled out a kunai from his back, one hand holding the kunai, while the other hand pressed on the kunai in his hand. Obviously he was ready to fight. To be honest, although you have always been called the Yama of Woodleaf, I still know the relationship between you and Woodleaf. So if possible, I really have no reason to fight with you. As he spoke, Hoodlum glanced at Nangong's clearly very determined eyes and laughed self-deprecatingly. However, I think that you have already made up your mind to fight with me. There's no point in talking anymore. Let's fight first. As he spoke, Nangongja directly drew his sword and ran towards Hoodlum. Nangongja held the disaster sword with both hands and placed it next to his left ear. The inner strength in his body circulated at high speed, mixing with killing intent and hostility as it wrapped around the disaster sword. There were even strands of undetectable sword chi that wrapped around the disaster sword. Gusts of wind quietly wrapped around Nangongja's body as he ran. Slowly the wind became stronger and stronger. Regardless of whether it was the surrounding tense curtains or the dust on the ground, they were all blown away by the wind. At this moment, Nangongja was like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountain, or a dragon dancing in the sky. His aura was extremely powerful and domineering. Hoodlum, who was standing opposite of Nangongja, naturally felt it the most. However, he still looked fearless as he quietly watched Nangongja charge towards him. It seemed that no matter how Nangongja prepared to attack him, he wouldn't lose. However, Nangongja wasn't affected by Hoodlum's attitude at all. Instead, he fell into an extremely mysterious state. Back when Nangongja entered the Woodleaf Academy, he relied on a state called Heart Sacrifice Technique to defeat Hitaki Kakashi in swordsmanship. He even received Hitaki Mao Shua's favor. However, over the years, it had become increasingly difficult for Nangongja to enter such a state. Today, Nangongja was completely immersed in his sword for the first time in a long time. Ignoring Hoodlum's expression and his surroundings, Nangongja suddenly had a strong desire in his heart. Swing the sword. Swing the sword non-stop. It wasn't to defeat his enemy, nor was it to familiarize himself with swordsmanship. It was purely to swing the sword. That strong desire was like a thirsty person craving for spring water, or a hungry person craving for food. It was a primitive desire that came from his own blood and body. Finally, Nangongja's body was in front of Hoodlum. His own calamity sword could also attack Hoodlum. The desire to swing the sword from the depths of his heart could no longer be suppressed. Hoodlum, who was facing Nangongja, seemed to want to say something, but Nangongja directly slashed his own face. Nangongja wasn't clear about Hoodlum's ability, but Hoodlum was clear about it. The so-called immunity to attacks was actually a transfer of a part of one's body to another space, allowing one's body to avoid being attacked. However, since a part of one's body had been transferred, it naturally wouldn't be able to display its original effect. Therefore, Hoodlum, who was about to speak, could only passively, actively. His words were interrupted. Chapter 347. When Hoodlum saw Nangongja's sword slash across his neck, his throat was transferred to his body. Just as Hoodlum was about to open his mouth to escape, Nangongja directly slashed at his shoulder joint. Nangongja's sword was extremely fast, so Hoodlum could only restrain himself and redirect Nangongja's attack. Limbs, joints, internal organs, and any other fatal or serious weakness of the human body were all attacked by Nangongja's sword. Hoodlum didn't have a chance to speak at all. He could only passively move a part of his body to avoid being hit. Just looking at the Red Heaven's Calamity Sword in Nangongja's hand, Hoodlum already felt great pressure. Nangongja, who was frantically swinging his sword, completely ignored Hoodlum's predicament. Instead, he seemed to be enjoying himself. The internal energy and sword energy covering the Heaven's Retribution Sword started to dissipate bit by bit, causing the originally ferocious Heaven's Retribution Sword to return to its original dark and simple appearance. Although the internal energy and sword energy were dispersed, Hoodlum didn't know why, but he felt that Nangongja's sword had become even more ferocious. The current state of the two of them was extremely comical. Hoodlum was like a wooden puppet standing in a daze on the spot. Because his joints were constantly being attacked by Nangongja, he couldn't exert any strength. Nangongja's sword was originally very fast, and it was as if the entire sky was filled with the afterimages of his sword. Smoke and dust surged around Nangongja, making him look very imposing. But now it was as if he had lost all of his strength. His sword danced very slowly, but one could faintly see that Nangongja's arm had transformed into several afterimages that attacked different parts of Hoodlum's body. As the one being attacked, Hoodlum naturally knew that it wasn't that Nangongja's speed had slowed down, but that his speed was too fast. It was beyond the range of what could be seen with the naked eye. The arm and the Heaven's Retribution Sword that could be seen with the naked eye were the result of countless afterimages overlapping. Everything seemed to be in a stalemate as time passed minute by minute. Nangongja didn't seem to be affected, but Hoodlum didn't seem to be as confident as before. Suddenly, Hoodlum gathered all the chakra that he could control and released it. The shockwave from the chakra forced Nangongja back by half a step. Hoodlum also took advantage of this opportunity to absorb his body into a spatial vortex and appear far away from Nangongja. Spatial ninjutsu. Previously, Nangongja wasn't able to distinguish what kind of ninjutsu Hoodlum used to avoid his attacks. However, after attacking for so long, Nangongja was able to detect spatial fluctuations. In order to avoid Nangongja's pursuit, Hoodlum skillfully used a spatial ninjutsu that allowed him to appear in another place. More importantly, Nangongja wasn't able to discover Hoodlum's method of avoiding his attacks, but he discovered a possible weakness of Hoodlum's ninjutsu. This weakness was very obvious, and that was time. One must know that when Nangongja and Hoodlum were fighting just now, the two of them were actually in a strange stalemate. If Hoodlum could continue using his ninjutsu, then he would naturally be able to continue this strange stalemate. However, Hoodlum's mentality began to change, and he seemed to be very unwilling to continue this stalemate. He directly compressed the chakra in his body and released it. Compressing chakra and releasing it wasn't a simple matter. To do so, not only did he have to have extreme control over his own chakra, but he also had to bear the possibility of the violent chakra constantly destroying his body. Although Hoodlum looked calm, Nangongja felt that he was just putting up a strong front. It was very likely that Hoodlum's body had already suffered internal injuries. Yama. I know the purpose of your visit, and it's definitely because of the sandbai. Although I don't know what you're trying to do with the sandbai, I don't want to care. Today's battle between you and me can be considered a draw, but in the future, we will naturally have a different victor. After saying that, Hoodlum's figure disappeared from Nangongja's vision. 4 minutes 37 seconds. Nangongja silently remembered this number in his heart. This was the time it took for Hoodlum to condense chakra and break free from his attacks. Hoodlum's limit must be around this time. This kind of troublesome ability must be treated seriously. Nangongja felt that he would definitely have a battle with Hoodlum, who belonged to the Akatsuki. After quietly keeping Hoodlum's matter in his heart, Nangongja walked to the table where Hoodlum was sitting. He picked up the scroll and hurriedly skimmed through it. After that, he seemed to have found some useful information and began to carefully read it. Outside the Akatsuki's secret camp, Hoodlum and Zetsu were standing together looking at Nangongja's camp. Zetsu was puzzled as he asked Hoodlum, "Why didn't you deal with this guy? Although it seemed like you didn't have the strength to retaliate, but I know that as long as you're willing to pay a small price, you can definitely kill this alien ninja who cultivates internal energy. This guy, I feel that we will definitely have to face a formidable opponent in the future." Hoodlum glanced at Zetsu, who was standing beside him, and said with a bit of ridicule, No, he still has his own value. Our goal has never been to eliminate dissidents, but to collect tailed beasts to complete our plan. Although Nangongja is indeed troublesome, but if we look at the long term, we will know that there will definitely be some differences between this Nangongja and Windstorm Watergate. Originally, they appear to be united but are actually divided, and it won't be long before they shed all pretense of cordiality. When the time comes, we just have to use a little bit of our methods, and Windstorm Watergate and Nangongja will definitely have a battle. The battle between the two of them was also a battle between the Blood-clad Pavilion and Konoha. When the time comes, we will just sit back and reap the benefits. Wouldn't it be more worthwhile than fighting to the death? Finished speaking, Hoodlum directly turned around and didn't look at the dozens of Akatsuki members who had died in the camp. Chapter 348. After reading all the scrolls on the table, Nangongja tried to wander around the tent. Some of the places where Nangongja thought could be used to store confidential documents were also checked by Nangongja one by one, but he still didn't get any valuable information. Tailed beast for the human race, it was really too strange. Even if the human race didn't know how many times these 9-tailed beasts were sealed in Column Force's body, even in the long river of history, there were many people who achieved perfect compatibility with the tailed beasts in their body, but tailed beasts were still a big mystery. Even the tailed beasts themselves couldn't explain clearly why they were born and why they didn't die out. Although Akatsuki organization targeted tailed beasts, but their research was also extremely deep and couldn't form any valuable information. Nangongja indeed had some interesting conjectures in the scrolls, but conjectures were after all just conjectures. There was no way to prove it. Dealing with the sandbai didn't seem to be a simple matter. Nangongja's eyes turned. He hoped that he could think of a way to drive the sandbai out of here and hide it. In fact, Nangongja could fight with the Sanbai, which was relatively weak among the tailed beasts, and he also had a lot of confidence to kill the Sanbai, but the fact that the tailed beasts were immortal was really meaningless. In here, even if all his hair turned white, it wouldn't have any effect, so it was better to face the tailed beast that he obviously knew a lot about but never faced. From the scroll just now, Nangongja already knew the specific location of the Sanbai, so he didn't encounter any obstacles on the way to find the Sanbai. Along the way, Nangongja also found a lot of subtle traces of ninja activities, but after some analysis, Nangongja already knew that these ninjas who originally stayed here had already retreated. It seems that when the guy called Hoodlum ran away, he also let the Akatsuki ninjas retreat together with him. After walking for a while, Nangongja had already arrived at the side of the deep lake. Perhaps because the lake was too deep, the lake in front of Nangongja actually had a very deep blue-black color. Standing still, Nangongja directly released his internal energy and that surging momentum. He used this method to attract the Sanbai that was hidden in the deep lake. Nangongja's method was obviously very effective. The originally calm lake suddenly turned over a layer of white water, and a turtle shell with sharp spikes slowly floated up from the lake. Slowly, this huge creature revealed its full appearance, with a tortoise-like body and 3 long tails. It was obviously Nangongja's target, Sanbai Isabu. When the Sanbai appeared, its eyes were very fierce. After all, it was previously chased around by a human ninja like a dog. Now that he could finally have a good night's sleep, another human came to his doorstep and released his aura so casually, as if he was afraid that he wouldn't notice him. If this wasn't a provocation, then what was? Sanbai stared intently at the sword in Nangongja's hand. Instinctively, Sanbai felt that this thing, which was so small that it would be disdained to be its toothpick, was emitting a very dangerous feeling at this moment. Nangongja naturally noticed the gaze of the Sanbai, but Nangongja knew in his heart that now is not the time to fight with the Sanbai. His purpose is not to kill the Sanbai, but to let it escape from the control of Akatsuki. Together with the scabbard, Nangongja directly inserted his Heaven's Disaster sword into the slightly soft soil next to the deep lake, then shouted to the Sanbai, "Sanbai, I am not your enemy. I didn't come here to fight with you. As a tailed beast, you should be able to understand my words. Now I put my weapon aside to express my sincerity. I hope that I can have a good talk with you." Sanbai, who has been a Jinchuriki for several generations, naturally understood Nangongja's words. A look of doubt appeared in his eyes at this moment. After all, when humans see a tailed beast, they will either scream and run away, or blindly believe in their own strength and directly fight with the tailed beast. But there has never been a person like Nangongja who directly threw his weapon on the ground, and wanted to have a talk with the tailed beast. Even Column Force, who is connected to the life of a tailed beast, can't do this, right? In the memory of the Sanbai, there was only one person who was so close to it. Among the tailed beasts, the Sanbai itself is the kind of tailed beast with a relatively good character, so at this moment, the Sanbai also used a secret method to let its voice appear in Nangongja's mind. "Why should I believe you? You humans are all bad, attacking me for no reason. Every time I want to have a good sleep, someone will disturb me. When I was getting along with Yagura, suddenly a human used the same eyes as the old man's to control me and Yagura. I don't want to believe in humans anymore." A slightly immature voice suddenly appeared in Nangongja's mind, and the Sanbai in front of him also stared at Nangongja with his big eyes. Obviously the owner of this voice was the Sanbai. He thought that these tailed beasts were a group of old guys, but he didn't expect the Sanbai to have such a young voice. Should it be said that no tailed beasts can't be judged by their appearance? The Sanbai and Nangongja didn't have anything to hide, but they mentioned a lot of interesting things. Yagura is the name of a Mizukage of the Mist. It is said that he is the one who can perfectly use the power of the Sanbai Column Force. So it is natural that he and the Sanbai get along well. But there is actually someone who can control the Sanbai and Yagura at the same time. Nangongja doesn't know what kind of Genjutsu level is needed to achieve this, but such a person must have reached the pinnacle in Genjutsu. Not to mention these things, Nangongja also roughly figured out what kind of character the Sanbai has through the words of the Sanbai. As long as he can appease the Sanbai, it is not impossible to take the Sanbai away from this place where the Akatsuki is monitoring. Chapter 349. My name is Nangongja, and I'm currently a woodleaf ninja. I know you are the Sanbai, so what's your name? Ignoring the Sanbai's childish remarks about humans, Nangongja pointed to himself and introduced himself to the Sanbai, and asked for the Sanbai's name. The Sambai was also a little confused by Nangongja's behavior for a while, but Nangongja knew very well what he was doing. Since Sambai could communicate with him normally and had the temperament of a teenager or even a child, Nangongja corrected his attitude and no longer regarded Sambai as a monster. Instead, he treated Sambai as a human teenager. For a creature with self-awareness, the only thing that could make one feel happy was the acknowledgement of others, whether it was one's own abilities or some other characteristics. No matter how strange this person's expression was, the happiness in one's heart could not be concealed. Recognition is the most important pursuit of intelligent creatures. Nangongja has always felt that if he wants to truly recognize a person, he naturally has to start by knowing each other's names, so he directly introduced himself to the Sambai and asked for the Sambai's name on the way. It turned out that Nangongja's guess was correct. After Nangongja asked for the Sambai's name, the Sambai fell into a long silence. The human standing in front of him is somewhat different from the humans he has faced before. Originally, those humans were either full of fear or full of greed for him, but now, the Sambai can't see any bad intentions from the human in front of him. It's like he really just wants to chat with him here. The Sambai vaguely remembers when he was young, the old man pointed at him and gave him the name Isabu. Involuntarily, the Sambai said to Nangongja, "My name is Isabu. Sambai Isabu." Being able to get an answer from the Sambai is enough to prove that his current direction is correct. After Nangongja secretly cheered for himself in his heart, he tried his best to make his tone and expression gentle enough, then said to the Sambai, "Isabu? That's a pretty good name. I didn't come here with any ulterior motives. I came here to help you escape and not be disturbed by those annoying fellows. Are you willing to let me help you?" Isabu himself has the temperament of a teenager. In the face of such a person, he doesn't need to say so many dignified words. As long as he treats him sincerely and says what he wants to say, it will be fine. If he insisted on showing off his eloquence and tried to directly crush his will, it would only backfire. "But I just want to find a place to sleep. Although those people are a little annoying, they still tiptoe around me every time they approach me. I just have to deliberately ignore them and I can have a good sleep. Why do I need your help?" Isabu himself is a very lazy-tailed beast. As long as he has the chance, it is not impossible for him to stay in a place for hundreds of years. For such a jealous-tailed beast who is unwilling to move, it is better to let those boring people watch him sleep than to be forced to run around. "I know you don't like to change the place you live, but we have to leave here. Do you still remember the person who forced you to come here? He is the leader of a very powerful organization. I know that this organization is secretly planning a plan that is enough to change the whole world, and you and the other 8-tailed beasts are their target. I know that tailed beasts are immortal, but when you die you still need some time to recover. The feeling of death must not be that good, right? If you continue to stay here, although you can be free for a while, you won't be able to stay for long. I can help you leave here and then you can choose a place you like to continue living." Nangongja was actually trying to guess Sambai's thoughts, and then began to persuade Sambai to leave with him. Such a test directly lets Sambai know the seriousness of the situation. Sambai may not care about other things, but it has to take seriously the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths, who is the current holder of the Sage of Six Paths. He has the power of the Sage of Six Paths, but he still wants to collect the 9-tailed beasts? Nangongja did not know what would happen, but Sambai still vaguely felt some instinctive danger in his heart. He can't just sit there and wait for death. Otherwise, the final outcome may be worse than the death that Nangongja used to provoke Sambai. "What are you going to do?" Sambai was no longer as timid as before and he still sounded like a young boy. However, he was also much more serious as he asked Nangongja, "I have 2 plans. Nangongja smiled. He is not afraid that Sambai will doubt him, but he is afraid that Sambai will not listen to him at all. Since he has already started talking, there is naturally the possibility of continuing the discussion. "First of all, I have the spatial coordinates of a different space. If you want, I can extradite you to my space. Without my permission, no one can go to that space. This is the first option I offer you." When Sambai heard that Nangongja has the spatial coordinates of a different space, there was a very obvious surprise in his eyes, but he immediately shook his head to express his refusal. Tailed beasts themselves are the products of the special space of the ninja world. Once they leave the ninja world, tailed beasts are like trees without roots and water without a source. No matter how strong they are, they will become weak. Although Sambai is close to Nangongja, he is not willing to entrust his life to Nangongja. Hearing Sambai's refusal, Nangongja did not show any dissatisfaction. After all, they are discussing it and it is normal to have objections. In addition to the continent, Nearly 1/3 of the ninja world is the ocean. Isabu, you are a water-tailed beast. As long as you want, you can naturally live in the deep sea and there must be food in the ocean. So I think you can also go to the bottom of the sea and find a place to rest. This way you don't have to be afraid of people with ulterior motives. What do you think? Chapter 350. From Nangong's point of view, the two plans he proposed are very effective and pertinent. The Lion Clan's space is not only far away from the shinobi world, but he can also prevent others from entering this space through the Lion Clan, and the sea plan will make it more difficult for the Akatsuki to find the Sanbai. When Nangongja confidently told the Sanbai about his two plans, the Sanbai still ruthlessly refused. The reason why he can't leave the shinobi world has already been described in the previous article, and we won't repeat it again. The sea is not as calm as it looks. With the countless years of life experience of the Sanbai, doesn't he know that the sea is more suitable for him, and the sea is also a place where he can live safely? Therefore, the Sanbai actually lived in the sea for a period of time before. But in the shinobi world, there are not only ordinary beasts, but also existences beyond the beast that can refine chakra. Compared to the land, the number and ferocity of the creatures in the sea is more unimaginable. The Sanbai is indeed very strong as a bijou, but how can he not know that a group of ants can devour an elephant? I thank you for thinking so much for me, and I can also feel that you really think of a way out for me. But I've never been free. My existence has a mission. Death was scary, but what made me even more upset was that I had to give up my mission because of fear. You don't need to take me out of the shinobi world, nor do you need to cover me to the sea. You just need to find me a place where I can stay. The Sanbai's voice still sounded so young, but it contained the vicissitudes of life accumulated over many years. After taking a deep look at Nangongja, the Sanbai still seemed to be a little reluctant and said to Nangongja, "You just said that you have a different space. This is very good. The shinobi world is in chaos, and a different space may be a good shelter. You should take your family to hide in a different space as soon as possible to avoid the disaster." Halfway through its sentence, the voice that was supposed to appear in Nangongja's mind suddenly stopped when it was about to say something. At this moment, the Sanbai seemed to have suffered a huge injury. It roared loudly at the sky, and its huge body seemed to be rolling around in the pool due to the pain, bringing up huge waves. Nangongja was puzzled by the Three Tails' words. Nangongja did not understand the so-called calamity. However, Nangongja could still understand the current situation. It must have been because some tyrannical existence noticed that Sanbai had said something that it shouldn't have. Hence, it used some means to prevent Sanbai from continuing to speak to him and punished it. Nangongja tentatively released a little bit of his mental power to the three-tailed beast, hoping to figure out what kind of existence could bully a tailed beast like the three-tailed beast like a stray dog. When the wisp of mental strength was about to reach the Three Tails' forehead, an irresistible force directly erased Nangongja's mental strength. Nangongja also looked very pale at the moment because his mental strength was forcibly erased. What kind of power is this? Nangongja secretly asked himself in his heart, but there was no way to get any answer. Nangongja had encountered many powerful people and fought many of them. However, this was the first time that Nangongja felt that he could not win. Even if he used all his means, even if he did not care about the cost, there was no way he could hurt such an existence. And this existence seemed to be able to erase his existence as long as it was unhappy with him. In front of such an existence, Nangongja was like an ant. Such an existence did not belong to this world at all. This was the only definition that Nangongja could give to such an existence. The Three Tails' punishment seemed to have ended. The Three Tails, which was still rolling in pain in the pool, had calmed down at this moment. At the same time, Nangongja slowly recovered from the dizziness caused by the destruction of his mental strength. The Three Tails, which was talking a lot with Nangongja, did not say a word at this moment. It took a deep look at Nangongja, who was standing on the shore of the pool, then turned around and dived into the pool. After the Three Tails dived into the pool, mud waves kept churning from bottom to top. Did that existence give the Three Tails a warning not to have too much contact with me and not to tell me more? Nangongja could only find such a barely justifiable reason for the Three Tails' behavior. Although he was still very unhappy, he could only end it like this. The Three Tails, the unknown powerful existence, the crisis that swept the ninja world, the controlled Yagura and the Three Tails, Nangongja was only going to disrupt the Akatsuki's plan and vent his anger for little longer, but he didn't expect to come into contact with so many secrets all of a sudden. Gradually, Nangongja found that he was a little confused about this world. Originally, Nangongja thought that he had experienced a lot of things in the ninja world and knew a lot of secrets, but now it seems that the water of the ninja world is much deeper than he thought. Then, with his current strength, could he really protect his family? Or do I have to do what the Three Tails said? Once again, for the safety of my family, I have to run into the Lion Clan space and let my family stay there for 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years. Previously, because of his lack of strength, in order to protect his family, Nangongja let the 3 girls stay in the Lion Clan space. After so many years, was he still going to bring his family to live in a cold and empty place like the Lion Clan's alternate space without making any progress? At this moment, Nangongja could only feel an unusual irritation in his heart. The feeling of powerlessness was so strong. Looking at the Heaven's Retribution sword that was inserted in the ground by him, Nangongja slowly walked to its side, grabbed the scabbard, and took the Heaven's Retribution sword in his hand. Although the matter of the 3 tails can't be said to be perfectly solved, it can be said that the Akatsuki didn't get what they wanted. There is one thing that Nangongja has always been a little bit concerned about, so he decided to return home as soon as possible to solve the doubts in his heart. The water of the deep pool finally returned to its original blue-black color, and the sediment was deposited under the action of time, and everything seems to have returned to normal. No one knew that so many people had died here, and no one knew that an interracial dialogue had taken place here. No one knew that there was an irresistible expert who had once descended his will here. The pool water rippled under the blowing of the wind, and the storm of the ninja world seems to be about to begin. Chapter 351. Unlike before, when he was in a hurry to stop the Akatsuki's captivity plan, Nangongja's speed of returning to the Woodleaf could be considered as slow and leisurely. This journey took about a week. Including the time spent on the way up, Nangongja had personally been rushing about for nearly half a month. Rushing about, this was not only a word that Nangongja was most familiar with, it was also a word that Little Linger, Mishiro, and Nangongro were all familiar with. This was because Nangongja had practically turned rushing about into a way of life for the few of them to live a stable life. Moreover, this kind of life Nangongja himself was also very happy because this kind of rushing about was really effective, wasn't it? But because this time Nangongja went out, no one knew what exactly Nangongja was going to do, and also didn't know when exactly Nangongja would return. Therefore, the 3 girls didn't wait for Nangongja to return like before. After taking off his shoes and neatly placing them at the door, Nangongja hung his coat on the hanger and walked to the living room to pour a cup of water and sat down. When Nangongja returned home, it was already 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. The originally pitch-black sky was slowly illuminated by the brilliance of the sun, but because the sun hadn't completely revealed its appearance, the sky still looked somewhat gloomy. Just when Nangongja thought that the 3 girls at home should be immersed in their dreams, so he sat alone in the living room to rest for a while and show off his cooking skills, Nangongro walked out wearing a somewhat light nightgown. Different from the average female, Nangongro's figure was very tall. Even Mishiro was slightly shorter than Nangongro. Moreover, Nangongro's figure was relatively slender. When she walked out wearing a white floral nightgown, her sparkling and translucent skin seemed to become somewhat translucent under the blurry morning sunlight. Her hair was a bit messy because of sleep, and her face looked a bit dazed because of sleepiness. However, in Nangongja's eyes, his sister was showing a different kind of charm at this moment. The current Nangongro was no longer the Nangongro who kept a certain distance from him in the past few years, and worked hard to become gentle and virtuous. Instead, it was like a long time ago when the two of them depended on each other, the cute sister who acted wantonly to act coquettishly towards him. I'm back. At this moment, Nangongro's mind was still not clear because she had just woken up. For a moment, she actually didn't notice that Nangongja was already sitting in the living room. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and skillfully opened the refrigerator to take out a bottle of tea, seemingly preparing to pour it out to drink. In order to remind his sister a little, Nangongja opened his mouth to greet Nangongro. After a moment of silence, Nangongro's eyes stared in the direction of Nangongja for a while. Then, as if she suddenly realized her current situation, her eyes directly opened from the originally confused look directly from her original appearance. Brother, you're back? Nangongja nodded and said to Nangongro, Yeah, I just came back. When I saw that you were still sleepy, I wanted to wake you up and remind you not to trip and fall. When Nangongro heard Nangongja's words, she looked at her own clothes and her little face immediately flushed red. One had to know that her nightgown was very thin. Thin meant transparent, right? Moreover, she didn't like to wear certain indescribable things to sleep. Now that she looked at herself, she felt that she could clearly see the situation inside. Just when Nangongja saw that his sister's face suddenly flushed red in confusion, he thought that she had caught a cold and was about to go over to check her temperature. However, just then Mishiro walked out of his room. At the same time he saw Nangongja and Nangongro looking at each other, then looking at each other awkwardly. Unlike Nangongja, Mishiro could tell at a glance why Nangongro was blushing. Hence, he walked over to the place where the clothes and hats were hung and took a shawl to drape over Nangongro's shoulders, blocking the view under Nangongro's nightgown. Seeing Mishiro's actions, Nangongja also calmed down and understood why his sister's expression was so strange. That's right. His sister was only a little younger than him. Now that she was a big girl, she naturally had the thought of the difference between a man and a woman. As he thought about it, for some reason, Nangongja felt very uncomfortable in his heart. It was as if the sister who had accompanied him for his entire life was about to run away with another man. The frustration in his heart made Nangongja want to take out his calamity sword and chop all his future brothers-in-law to death. In the past, Yachue always joked with Nangongja, saying that Nangongja was a siscon. Although no one had said that in all these years, it seemed that Nangongja's siscon had not only not weakened, but it seemed to have strengthened by a lot. Sister Rower, you should go back and sleep for a while. Seeing that you haven't slept enough, I'll wake you up after breakfast is done, okay? Mishiro wrapped the shawl around Nangongro's shoulders tightly, then said to Nangongro in a very gentle manner. Compared to Nangongro's gentleness, Mishiro's gentleness was simply astonishing, and it was incomparably compatible with her. Even refined steel would be melted by Mishiro's gentleness, right? Nangongro looked at Mishiro standing in front of her, and for a moment she became silent. Sure enough, there's still no way to compete? Quietly, no one knew that Nangongro had already made such a judgment for herself. Nangongro silently walked back to her bedroom. Accompanied by Nangongja's confused gaze and Mishiro's even more complicated expression, Nangongro closed her door. After adjusting her mentality, Mishiro once again put on a smile on her face, then turned to Nangongja and said, "Since it's rare for you to wake up so early, why don't you help me make breakfast for Sister Rower and little Linger?" Mishiro's suggestion was what Nangongja was prepared to do previously. Naturally, Nangongja had nothing to say, but instead he took on the responsibility for Mishiro. "It's rare for me to make a meal, why don't you help me this time? Although I feel that my cooking might not be as good as yours, it's still a token of my goodwill after being away for half a month." Token of your goodwill. When Mishiro heard this word, she couldn't help but look at Nangongro's room. Chapter 352. After returning home in the morning, Nangongro and Nangongja did not speak much for the whole day. In fact, in the past few years, Nangongro was not as attached to her brother as she was when she was young. Nangongja thought he knew what was going on. After all, girls gradually grew up and understood the difference between men and women. It was understandable that they would keep a certain distance from each other. However, Nangongja felt that something was very wrong. The feeling that he had done something wrong lingered in Nangongja's heart for a long time. Could it be that he was wrong? When Nangongja began to have such a thought, the suspicion towards himself could not be stopped. The light of the sun gradually began to fade under the cover of the mountain peak. The bright moon seemed to be holding back its strength to release its brilliance. It was already night time, but the moonlight tonight was exceptionally bright. In the courtyard of Nangongja's house, there were a few small paths paved with terrazzo stones. Under the illumination of the moonlight, the small courtyard was very bright. Nangongja saw that the moonlight tonight was just right, so he directly sat cross-legged on the eaves. He casually placed his green jade gourd and a small wine cup that he found at home beside him. Obviously he was going to sit there and drink. Nangongro looked at Nangongja, who was sitting alone outside. She turned back to look at Mishiro, who seemed to be cleaning up the dishes in the kitchen. Her eyes could not help but have a little doubt. If it was any other time, when Mishiro saw Nangongja sitting outside wanting to drink, no matter what kind of work he was doing, he would definitely be very gentle like a good wife and mother, pouring wine for Nangongja. This time Mishiro did not react at all, which made Nangongro feel a little strange. But then Nangongro's eyes rolled around as if she thought of something. Therefore, Nangongro gently opened the door between the living room and the eaves, and very respectfully sat beside Nangongja. After sitting down, Nangongro even tidied up her clothes properly to make sure that her sitting posture was meticulous enough. Obviously, she was very concerned about her image at this moment. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with her posture, she reached out her hand and took Nangong's green jade gourd in her hand. This green jade gourd contained Nangong's favorite wine, so Nangongja usually treasured it and almost no one would touch it. When Nangong Ro picked her brother's favorite wine gourd, Nangong Ro the green jade gourd with a cold and warm texture from her palm to her head. TSK, although Nangong Ro was very careful and hoped that she could lower the sound of pouring wine, it was already night, and the surrounding environment was relatively quiet, so the sound of pouring wine was still so clear. She placed the wine glass on the floor of the eaves, stretched out 2 fingers, and gently pushed the wine glass to Nangong's hand. Nangong Ro once again returned to her previous awkward but incomparably strict sitting posture. It was hard to imagine how Mashiro's sister learned to sit like this for the whole day. It was really uncomfortable. Ruru. Nangongja naturally knew that his sister was pouring wine for him, so he called out his undying name. When Nangong Ro heard Nangongja call her name, her body obviously trembled. Brother, is there a problem? To be honest, this was the first time Nangong Ro poured wine for Nangongja. Therefore, Nangong Ro was also very nervous in her heart. She was afraid that she would do something wrong and make her brother unhappy. Nangong Ro was also very angry in her heart. Usually when she saw Mashiro's sister pouring wine for her brother, she was so elegant and natural, but why did she become so stiff and uncoordinated when it came to herself? Maybe her brother was a little unhappy because of this? Am I going to be replaced by Mashiro's sister by my brother? She didn't know why, but this was the first thought that appeared in Nangong Ro's mind. For the little girl, it seemed that she might be replaced by Mashiro more than being scolded by her brother. Nangongja turned his head to look at his sister. Naturally, he noticed her extremely unnatural expression, and said to his sister with some doubts, "Why do you have such an expression? You look like I'm bullying you." "You?" Nangong Ro softly muttered, "You've always been bullying me." Although she was muttering, Nangongja's hearing was still able to hear what his sister was saying. He reached out his hand and quietly placed a strand of loose hair back on his sister's ear. He said to his sister very gently, "Oh? How should I explain this? You're my sister, I can't wait to dote on you, how can I bully you?" Hearing her brother's question, Nangong Ro didn't know what to say for a moment. Her eyes were a little embarrassed. Her eyes drifted left and right as if she was struggling with something. Finally, she opened her cherry lips and bit her lower lip with her pearly white teeth. She seemed to have made up her mind and said to Nangongja, "Brother? Are you and Mashiro's sister?" Nangong Ro only said half of her words, as if she hoped that her brother could understand her meaning. "Mashiro?" Hearing his sister's words, Nangongja was a little confused. He didn't seem to understand his sister's meaning and said to Nangong Ro, "Why are you suddenly talking about your Mashiro's sister?" Nangong Ro looked at her brother with a face full of resentment. Finally, she gathered her courage and held Nangongja's hand. She used her fingers to gently rub the calluses on Nangongja's palm and thumb due to years of sword practice. She looked into Nangongja's eyes and said very seriously, "Brother, I understand you just like how you understand me. You know what I mean by that? As expected? Your Mashiro's sister and I are family just like you are my family. I know that you have your own worries in your heart, but some things are destined to be solved by yourself. No matter what happens, you will always be my most beloved sister. Just like when I first came to Woodleaf, everything I do is to protect my family." Nangongja and Nangong Ro weren't blood-related, this was something that both of them were very clear about. But because they weren't blood-related, Nangong Ro, who was still a young girl, naturally thought more about it. The two of them didn't ask the question they wanted to ask, nor did they get the answer they wanted to know. Nangongja reached out and grabbed the wine cup beside him. He raised his head and poured the drunken immortal wine into his mouth. It was clearly his favorite wine, but Nangongja didn't have the mood to savor it at all. Chapter 353. People will always grow, and some of the feelings that were originally ignored will slowly start to grow in their hearts. Just like Nangongja and Nangong Ro, who was sitting next to Nangong Ro when she was young, she enjoyed her brother's hard work for her. Even though the days were so difficult for Nangong Ro, it was her most cherished time. But as time passed, Nangongja, who she and her grandfather had high hopes for, did indeed show his brilliance, and let the whole ninja world give him the title of Yama. Originally, Nangong Ro thought that she would still be happy for her brother's achievements like before. But things didn't go as she wished. Nangong Ro didn't know why there were a lot of feelings in her heart that she didn't have before. And these complicated emotions became stronger after the appearance of Mishiro. In the beginning, Mishiro was still very immature and blank. Whether it was for life or for herself, she didn't have any understanding of herself. But slowly Mishiro changed little by little. Mishiro, who was originally a little natural, began to slowly learn how to cook, wash and take care of a family. Nangong-ro was also one of the beneficiaries of this change, but in her heart she was very unwilling to accept such care. So Nangong-ro also forced herself to change. Nangong-ro, who was so lively and active, changed, became more gentle, became more caring and became like another Mishiro. But the more she changed, the more confused Nangong-ro's heart became. Because Nangong-ro found that no matter how she changed, there was no way she could be as careful and gentle as Mishiro. Mishiro was like the incarnation of the word gentle. Every day he was as gentle as water, taking care of Nangong-ji, taking care of Nangong-ro, and taking care of little Linger, who was like the original Nangong-ro. What kind of feeling was that? If a name had to be given, perhaps only a word like sense of crisis would be appropriate, right? When Nangong-ji said that she would always be his family, Nangong-ro didn't know why, but her heart was filled with an inexplicable resistance. It seemed that she didn't want to be Nangong-ji's family. Nangong-ro had something more that she longed for. But these were words that Nangong-ro couldn't say, and Nangong-ro didn't dare to say it. Nangong-ro's hand that was holding the green jade gourd tightened. The originally cool and gentle feeling of the green jade gourd made her feel as if she was holding a piece of ice that would never melt. The coldness invaded her palm, attacked Nangong-ro's blood vessels and eroded Nangong-ro's heart. Silence? Nangong-ro could only remain silent. Everything passed in silence. Nangong-ji drank the wine that his sister poured for him, and Nangong-ro poured wine for Nangong-ji again and again in a somewhat mechanical manner. Finally, Nangong-ji seemed to feel that it was enough, so he gently covered his wine cup with his hand. Obviously, he didn't want his sister to continue pouring wine for him. Nangong-ro immediately understood. She plugged the green jade gourd stopper back and turned around to walk back into the house. Nangong-ji stood on the eaves enjoying the cold night breeze. Mishiro also slowly walked to Nangong-ji's side. You heard everything? Nangong-ji knew that Mishiro had come to his side, so he asked Mishiro. Nangong-ji's voice sounded a little weak, and it was unknown whether it was because of the wine or because of his emotions. It was as if he had no energy at all. Actually, I know myself very well. I'm a complete idiot when it comes to matters of the heart. I don't understand why my sister and I have become like this. It puzzles me and makes me blame myself. She's my sister, but I didn't fulfill my responsibility to take good care of her. It's not that you don't understand. Mishiro didn't sit respectfully beside Nangong-ji like before. Instead, he leaned lazily against the eaves and sat opposite Nangong-ji. Actually, you know what Nangong-ro is thinking about, what I'm thinking about, and even what little Linger is thinking about. But you chose not to understand. Because if you understand, you have to face it. If you understand, you have to accept change. But you don't like change the most. It can even be said that you're the most afraid of change. You only hope that your life can be as you imagine it to be, unchanging and peaceful. So you chose to escape. Even Ro or little Linger and I have to escape with you. This isn't a big deal. Who doesn't want to escape from something? Even if you're called Yama, a role that's close to being the judge of life, you're still an ordinary person in this world. Your pressure and your sense of responsibility have already exhausted you. So escaping isn't shameful. It's even somewhat effective. But some things have to be faced in the end. So, although I don't hate you for escaping, it's best that you don't escape for too long. After saying this, Mishiro also left. Nangong-ji knew that Mishiro was telling the truth. Did he really not see through it? Did he really not understand it at all? Emotions were a very important difference between humans and animals. Because of their desire to survive and reproduce, animals begin to act on their own. On the other hand, humans wrapped their bestial nature with a layer of chains called emotions, which made them different from animals. But weren't emotions also a weapon that hurt humans? Nangong-ji was afraid. As a person who had been injured countless times on the battlefield and had been on the brink of death countless times, he was very afraid at this moment. Nangong-ji didn't want to face it because once he did, there was a possibility that he would be injured. Nangong-ji didn't want to participate in such a gamble. But Mishiro was right. The path of escape would eventually lead to the end. He had to face it eventually. As he thought about it, Nangong-ji's heart became particularly irritable. Nangong-ji, who had been restraining himself from drinking, took out his green jade gourd again. This time he didn't use a wine cup. Instead he poured it directly into his mouth. Nangongzhi didn't know how much of the precious drunken immortal wine was wasted because of his rough actions. However, Nangongzhi didn't feel any heartache or regret. Instead, he continued to drink the wine in his mouth. Chapter 354. Not to mention how complicated Nangongzhi's mood was at home. At this moment, Woodleaf was more lively than usual, and the reason was the statement issued by the Hokage's office to the village during the day. At this moment, Woodleaf was actually a bit unstable. After all, the 3 generations of Hokage who ruled Woodleaf for many years had just passed away, and the roots of Woodleaf, which can be said to be deeply rooted and powerful, were jointly destroyed by Watergate and Nangongzhi. Although everyone didn't say anything on the surface, they inevitably had some worries in their hearts. With such a consumption of strength, can Woodleaf Village still occupy the position of the top 5 shinobi villages in the shinobi world? Watergate himself is very good at understanding other people's thoughts, or very good at guessing people's minds. He is also very clear about the current situation in the village, so Watergate has already asked his master, one of the Sannin, to go outside the village to find the princess of the Senju clan, Woodleaf Tsunadeheim, Tsunade. Tsunade herself is a very important symbol in the noble forces of Woodleaf, and her medical ninjutsu is the best in the shinobi world. If such a person can return to Woodleaf after more than 10 years, whether it's the ordinary members of Woodleaf or the various families, it's a shot in the arm. And just today Watergate has received a notice from his master. Tsunade's problem has been solved, although there are a few twists and turns. Watergate has persuaded Tsunade to return to Woodleaf again. And Minato also directly notified all his subordinates, and immediately announced such a news within the village and even the shinobi world, which can be regarded as a warning to the unstable hearts of the people and the enemies in the shinobi world. Many of Konoha's people have fought under Tsunade's command. Even Nangongzhi has served under Tsunade for a while. As a female ninja, Tsunade has a unique charm, and many people are convinced by Tsunade. That kind of heroic spirit, even many men can't compare to it, right? The time when Tsunade officially returned to the village was about 9 o'clock in the morning the next day. Woodleaf's ninjas and civilians have gathered at the village gate at this moment, and it seems that they have been waiting for a long time. Even Watergate, who hasn't been wearing Hokage's hat for a long time, stood in a white tent with a red flame pattern on it, waiting for Tsunade's arrival. On the road outside Woodleaf's gate, Tsunade and Jiraiya walked slowly on the road, step by step. But Jiraiya, who was usually so talkative, was unusually silent at this moment. As the two continued to move, hidden in the forest, gradually, and Tsunade's face was hidden in the forest. The tall shadow rock engraved with 4 Hokage heads appeared in front of Tsunade's eyes, and her originally slow pace directly stopped at this moment. On the shadow rock, 2 of them were Tsunade's grandfathers and 1 was Tsunade's sensei. Suddenly seeing the faces of these 3 people who were so familiar with her, but who have also left the world, appear in front of her, even Tsunade, who didn't care about life and death, had mixed feelings at this moment. A pair of slightly red eyes appeared on his face, which looked very young because he had cultivated a secret technique. I'm back, but everything seems to have changed. Whether it's the broken tree or the rope tree, whether it's my grandfathers or sensei, they're all gone at this moment. Is this Woodleaf really the place I used to call home? Tsunade has begun to ask herself such a question silently in her heart, but she has no idea what kind of answer she will get, or there is no so-called answer to such a question. Seeing Tsunade stop, Jiraiya's Adam's apple rolled a few times on his neck. He seemed to think for a while and finally said, "Tsunade. Let's go, Watergate is still waiting for us in the village." Tsunade looked back at Jiraiya, who was looking at her, and her eyes almost made Jiraiya want to take Tsunade and leave here directly. The situation of the village, the situation of Watergate, Jiraiya all wanted to leave these behind. Jiraiya really didn't want to see the woman he loved for a lifetime have to face those things that hurt her. But such an impulse was instantly suppressed by Jiraiya from his heart, because perhaps for people like Jiraiya, Woodleaf's matter is beyond his personal feelings. If there is a conflict between Woodleaf and his feelings, Jiraiya can only choose the side that benefits Woodleaf. Perhaps this is the reason why Tsunade chose to break the tree instead of someone who obviously knows better. Let's go. For some reason Jiraiya always felt that he seemed to see a touch of disappointment in Tsunade's eyes, but when he looked carefully it disappeared. Tsunade also knew that her current appearance with red eyes was not suitable to appear in front of others, so she used chakra to touch her eyes. The original obvious redness and swelling disappeared in an instant. Tsunade, who looked very lovable just now, has become high-spirited at this moment. Even Jiraiya, who followed Tsunade, felt very envious of her spirit. Sure enough, women, especially strong women like Tsunade, are the kind of people who are very good at hiding their hearts. Slightly sighing in his heart, Jiraiya followed Tsunade's footsteps and walked towards the gate that was not so far away from them. At this moment, all the gates were opened, and residents of Woodleaf stood on the side of the main road. Among these residents there were also many ninjas, and their eyes were naturally very good. After faintly seeing the figures of Jiraiya and Tsunade, the people waiting at the gate immediately became excited. These two are strong people who led Woodleaf to victory in the Third Shinobi World War. Every resident of Woodleaf has a natural worship for the strong, so when Jiraiya and Tsunade appeared in front of everyone became restless. The shadow guards who followed Watergate here were also sent by Watergate to maintain the order at the scene, so that the excited people would not do anything bad. Watergate also tidied up his clothes, wearing his white haori, and slowly walked towards the gate. Chapter 355. Taking a few quick steps, Watergate walked towards Jiraiya and Tsunade, who were walking towards him. Holding Tsunade's hand very kindly, Watergate said to Tsunade with some relief and excitement, "Welcome back." Watergate's face still had the signature hearty smile, but Tsunade felt that Watergate had changed from before. On the contrary, it made Tsunade feel that Watergate seemed to faintly see the style of the 3 generations Hokage who was called Ninja Hero when he was young. Sure enough, does being Hokage really change a person? Watergate, who was innocent and cute and sometimes even blushed because of her malicious teasing, has also changed. Although it was a little difficult to accept in her heart after all, it was in public. Watergate, as the Hokage of Woodleaf, can treat her like this. Tsunade still has to express something. So she also showed a smile on her face and said to Watergate, "Thank you for Hokage-sama's reception, I'm back." After listening to Tsunade's words, Watergate seemed to be a little unhappy and said to Tsunade, "Tsunade-sama is wrong. You and my sensei are in the same team of ninja, so you are my elder. Even if I'm Hokage, I'm still Minato Watergate, no matter how much respect I have for you. You are not only a powerful ninja but also a hero of Woodleaf. I naturally should give you the treatment you deserve." These words sounded really bureaucratic, but no one could find fault with it. Standing behind Tsunade, Jiraiya looked at his disciple, who was fully showing his personal charm as Hokage and Minato Watergate at this moment, and for a while he was somewhat at a loss. Jiraiya was actually a little repulsed by such things, but these things were also indispensable, and Jiraiya naturally had no position to say anything. Everything was so jubilant, and everyone seemed to be immersed in the lively atmosphere of the return of Woodleaf's powerhouse. Yabuki, who liked the lively atmosphere, naturally took her daughter, who was on vacation at home, to see the ceremony of the most famous female ninja in Woodleaf history returning to Woodleaf. After such a ceremony, Yabuki also took her daughter Sakura to visit Nangongja's home after a long time. For Yabuki, whether it was Nangongja, Nangong-ro, Little Linger, or Mashiro, they were all very welcome. The mother and daughter were welcomed into the house and warmly received. Yabuki naturally also told Nangongja about Tsunade's return. After listening to these words, Nangongja couldn't help but sigh. "When I first became a ninja and stepped into the battlefield of World War III, I first served Tsunade-sama and White Fang-sama. It was also at that time that I received a lot of care from Tsunade-sama and White Fang-sama. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be who I am now," Nangongja said with some nostalgia in his eyes. Seeing Sakura sitting quietly next to Yabuki, Nangongja also seemed to suddenly think of something and continued, "In fact, Sakura and Tsunade-sama also have this fate. During the Chunin exam, in order to let Sakura quickly develop combat power, I also taught Sakura a method called one-inch punch. In fact, to a large extent, this method of exerting power is also because I followed Tsunade-sama back then and saw Tsunade-sama exert monstrous strength several times. Sakura and Tsunade-sama are also somewhat similar, whether it is the control of chakra or the way of fighting, they have similar parts. In Sakura's heart, Nangongja himself is a rare strong man in the world." Now that Nangongja actually began to praise a female ninja so much, naturally Sakura was a little surprised. "Nangong-sen, is this Tsunade-sama so powerful? Obviously she doesn't look very old, but she is called a Sannin like the old white-haired uncle behind her. Is Sannin actually the same name as Hokage?" Sakura asked her question without hesitation. Sure enough, girls care more about a person's appearance. Although aware that what she said was a little rude, Sakura didn't intend to apologize at all. Instead, she seemed to be ready to get to the bottom of this matter. I don't know very well, but Tsunade-sama is indeed of the same generation as Jiraiya-sama. It seems that he has cultivated some kind of secret technique that allows him to keep his appearance unchanged. Eternal youth? Nangongja's words directly made all the girls in the house light up. Just like a pervert who saw a beauty, their eyes glowed with lust. As long as it's a woman, there is no one who doesn't care about their appearance. When they heard that a secret technique that can make them eternal youth really exists, no one wouldn't be tempted. Naturally, Sakura also thought of Tsunade's soft face and impressive figure that she saw at the gate just now. If only she could do the same. Nangong-san, I want to worship Tsunade-sama as my teacher. After an almost negligible amount of time of inner struggle, Sakura finally said such a sentence to Nangongja. Indeed, I also think that if I let you practice under Tsunade-sama, you will make great progress, but I haven't said anything yet. Why do you already have such a plan? Nangongja obviously still didn't understand how great the temptation of eternal youth is for women. Nangong-san, you also said that Tsunade-sama and I are very similar to each other. So naturally I hope that I can stay young. I know I want to be stronger. So, please introduce me to Tsunade-sama. No matter what the test is, I am willing to accept it. Although Sakura accidentally revealed her purpose, her eyes were very firm. Obviously, she wanted to become Tsunade's disciple. Nangongja also felt that this was a good choice, so he could only nod and say to Sakura, I will try to convey your request to Tsunade-sama, but now that Tsunade-sama has just returned to the village, there will be a lot of people who will bother her during this time. After a while, I will go to Tsunade-sama and ask her to accept you as her disciple. Sakura, I watched you grow up. Uncle Nangong naturally hopes that you can have a better future and become stronger. I just hope that this face will be of some use, right? After all, although Tsunade-sama looks very heroic, in fact, she is somewhat inexplicably capricious. Chapter 356. After the grand welcoming ceremony at the Woodleaf Gate, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Watergate finally left the crowd and came to the Hokage office building to meet with the representatives of the elder group, Zhuan Shaochun and Mito Menitis. Unlike the welcoming ceremony at the gate of the Woodleaf clan, this was the real welcoming ceremony for Tsunade's return to the Woodleaf clan. Although Zhuan Shaochun and Mito Menitis didn't have a close relationship with Tsunade, as representatives of the Woodleaf clan, they were naturally closer to Tsunade, who was a direct descendant of the Senju clan. When the five of them got together, some meaningless greetings were inevitable. Zhuan Shaochun and Mito Menitis were very talkative people themselves. Watergate also improved under various activities as Hokage over the years. Tsunade, as a direct descendant of the Senju clan, was naturally very good at social speech. Although Jiraiya didn't like to communicate with people so much, he was also very good at it. The five of them exchanged pleasantries for nearly 20 minutes, but all of them seemed to be in high spirits. After all, Jiraiya's background was relatively low, and he didn't like this kind of environment, so he took the lead and said to Watergate, We'll have time to talk later, but Tsunade has just returned to the village. She must be very tired even if she doesn't have to travel all the way. Why don't we give Tsunade's resignation as soon as possible, and then let Tsunade go back and rest early? Watergate was naturally the closest to Jiraiya, and he knew that his master didn't like this scene so much, so he nodded and said to Mito Menitis, Zhuan Shaochun and Tsunade, what Jiraiya-sensei said also makes sense. Anyway, Tsunade-sama has returned, we don't have to rush. Why don't we take a seat? Watergate's hand made a palm gesture and invited them to take a seat. As the Hokage, naturally no one would disrespect Watergate, so they all pulled out the chair next to them and sat down in the conference room. And the moment Jiraiya, who proposed to directly start the formal meeting, sat down on the chair, the relaxed look on his face was reflected in everyone's eyes. Although Jiraiya didn't sit on the chair in a very relaxed manner, he was still a little loose. Tsunade, who was sitting next to him, glanced at Jiraiya. Seeing Jiraiya's loose posture, she was not used to it. He stretched out a hand and gently patted Jiraiya's thigh, reminding him not to sit so loosely. But when Jiraiya saw Tsunade's hand reaching out to his leg and patting him gently, he didn't understand Tsunade's intention at all. Instead, he had a wretched look on his face. He even wiped his eyes on the corner of his clothes and looked at Tsunade's soft hand that was about to hold it. Although Tsunade was famous for her medical ninjutsu, her hot temper and terrifying monstrous strength weren't just for show. Originally, Tsunade wanted to remind Jiraiya because his posture was a bit indecent, but she didn't expect that Jiraiya, the intimate paradise, was really not thinking about serious things. He didn't know what Jiraiya was imagining in his mind, but his slightly widened nostrils, narrowed pupils and rapid breathing really made people feel that the word wretched existed for guys like Jiraiya. You bastard, enough is enough. Just when Jiraiya's hand was about to hold Tsunade's hand, Tsunade finally couldn't continue to hide in front of Mito Menitis, Zhuan Shaochun and Watergate. Chakra directly broke out and chakra condensed on Tsunade's fist. Blue veins stood out on her temple and neck. Obviously, Tsunade also endured a lot. Just, Tsunade, it's my fault. Don't. At this moment, Jiraiya finally remembered the horror of being dominated by Tsunade's iron fist. Jiraiya, who had always boasted of being romantic and not obscene, was now blasted out of the wall and turned into a star flying in the sky. The scream in his mouth was like the sound of the friction between the sky and the air. It unexpectedly had a different kind of beauty. She just didn't know how many bones in Jiraiya's body would be broken after he landed, and where would he need to rest. Watergate, Zhuan Shaochun, and Mito Menitis could only watch Jiraiya die and Tsunade explode without saying a word. Nonsense. Who would dare to stand up at this time? Who wouldn't dare to fight with Tsunade's temper? And Tsunade's monstrous fist was so easy to endure. Even a powerful ninja like Jiraiya would sometimes break a few of his ribs after being punched by Tsunade. He had to recuperate. Let's get down to business. Watergate glanced at the huge hole in the wall of the conference room, and he was a little distressed. He had to pay for it again. Hearing Minato's words, Udatane Koharu and Mitokado Hamura also hurriedly agreed. They couldn't let Tsunade sulk like this. If she couldn't figure it out and left the village in anger, what would they do? Woodleaf wouldn't be able to survive in the ninja world anymore. Zhuan Shaochun looked at Watergate, Mito Menitis and Tsunade sitting next to him, took out a letter of appointment from his arms, handed it to Tsunade and said at the same time, after the discussion between the elders of Kiba and Woodleaf Hokage, we decided to restore one of the Woodleaf Sannin, the daughter of the Senju clan, Tsunade, as the director of Kiba Hospital and the commander-in-chief of the Woodleaf Medical Force. Since it's peacetime, the medical force has no combat mission for the time being. Instead, it has assumed the responsibility of training medical ninjas. As the innovator of the three-person team system, we decided to let Tsunade be responsible for training new medical ninjas of Woodleaf. Tsunade, I don't know if you are willing to accept? Tsunade glanced at Watergate sitting next to her with a little surprise, and Watergate also smiled very gently at Tsunade. You know, Tsunade also proposed a plan to vigorously train medical ninjas, but it has never been passed. She didn't expect to have such a training plan as soon as she returned to Woodleaf today. And according to Zhuan Shaochun's words, it's not difficult to infer that her authority has been greatly delegated. It can be said that she can train medical ninjas according to her wishes. This was unimaginable in the past. It seems that Watergate must have contributed to such a plan, right? Chapter 357. In the Hokage office building, Watergate, Tsunade, Zhuan Shaochun, and Mito Menitis were discussing Tsunade's future responsibilities and obligations. Jiraiya, who had just been punched into a meteor in the sky by Tsunade, had used his various means to land safely on the ground. In fact, the reason why Jiraiya acted like that just now was largely because he didn't want to be in the same room with the four people just now. In Jiraiya's opinion, if Tsunade was still wandering in the shinobi world, she would be much happier than in Woodleaf. Woodleaf has too many hidden secrets and heartbreaking tragedies. Even Jiraiya would leave Woodleaf for the shinobi world if he had nothing to do. Although Jiraiya has always boasted that he collected important information while collecting materials, Woodleaf's umbu and intelligence collection personnel are not as good as Jiraiya. In fact, Jiraiya didn't want to stay in Woodleaf for too long. Jiraiya does love Woodleaf deeply and he is willing to pay any price for Woodleaf, but it doesn't mean that Jiraiya likes those high-ranking decision-makers who stand at the top of Woodleaf. As a ninja from a grassroots background, no one knows better than Jiraiya the face of these decision-makers and what they do. Wandering aimlessly on the street from time to time, he put his hand on his chest where Tsunade's punch just hit. With a slightly bitter face, he slowly rubbed it, hoping to relieve some of the pain. His eyes wandered around. In fact, Jiraiya hasn't wandered on the streets of Woodleaf for a long time. Usually when he was in Woodleaf he would either peep. No, go to the women's bathhouse to collect materials, or help Watergate deal with all kinds of troublesome matters. It's been a long time since he could wander on the street with nothing to do. While walking, Jiraiya suddenly saw a shop sign. This shop was Naruto's favorite, Ichiraka Ramen. There was a large hand-painted poster at the entrance of the shop, and Tsunade's image was drawn on it. The painting was really good, and it preserved Tsunade's spirit. Under Tsunade's image there was a big line written, "Welcome Tsunade-sama back to Woodleaf, 10% off all ramen." Seeing this, Jiraiya smiled and thought that the owner of this shop was really good at doing business. Jiraiya opened the curtain of Ichiraka Ramen and walked inside. When the boss saw a customer coming in, he enthusiastically shouted, "Welcome, may I know what you need? Now 10% off all the ramen in the shop." Seeing the enthusiastic gesture of the boss, Jiraiya unconsciously relaxed. He casually pulled out a chair and said to the boss is really good at doing business. Knowing that Tsunade-sama has returned to Woodleaf, you can still think of such a promotion method. You must have made a lot of money today, right? Hearing Jiraiya's teasing words, the boss stretched out his hand and scratched the back of his head and said to Jiraiya, "I don't know about this. It's just that a customer who comes occasionally told me that doing more small activities can make the business better. He even personally drew the poster for me at the door. Don't say, although there is a 10% discount, the flow of people is indeed a little more than before." Hearing the boss mention the poster at the door, Jiraiya remembered the painting of Tsunade's spirit. He was also interested and asked the boss of Ichiraka Ramen, "Speaking of which, the painting at the entrance of your shop is really good. I've seen Tsunade-sama, and she is exactly the same as that painting. Even her temperament was drawn." Mentioning the poster at the door, Karate excitedly said to Jiraiya as if he was showing off, "This was drawn by the sister of a regular customer. I didn't expect that someone could draw a person so similar. When Tsunade-sama's welcoming ceremony was held, I took a look from a distance and found that it was really similar to the poster at our door." "Wait, aren't you?" Mentioning Tsunade's welcoming ceremony, the boss looked at Jiraiya with long white hair and red paint on his face in front of him. The more he looked at him, the more he looked like Jiraiya, who was also a Sannin following Tsunade at Woodleaf's entrance. Jiraiya naturally knew that the boss recognized him, so he quickly reached out and pressed the boss's hand down, and then said to the boss, Yes, I am. Don't make it public, I'm just your customer now." The boss's reaction was also very fast. He knew that he was a little too excited. You know, even Hokage-sama occasionally comes to eat in his shop. Now that a Sannin came to his shop, it wasn't something unacceptable. "You're right, you're just my customer. Even Hokage-sama sometimes comes to my house to eat ramen." "It's nothing," the boss said to Jiraiya as if he was showing off, as if he wanted to prove how popular his shop was. Because Naruto really loved Ichiraka Ramen, occasionally Watergate would follow Naruto to eat at Ichiraka Ramen. After the initial surprise, the boss slowly got used to this kind of thing, and even occasionally showed off to his customers. Obviously, the boss wanted to show off the popularity of his shop. Jiraiya was naturally clear about Naruto's love for Ichiraka Ramen, so perhaps to cater to the boss's enthusiasm, Jiraiya also smiled and said to the boss, "That's really amazing, I didn't expect Hokage-sama to like this shop so much. I don't know what Hokage-sama likes to eat the most. Give me a bowl of ramen, let me try it and see how delicious it is that even Hokage-sama can't forget it." Hearing Jiraiya's words, the boss's face was full of joy, so he shouted, "Okay. Hokage-sama's special, super large barbecued pork ramen." After that, the boss hurriedly went to make ramen for Jiraiya. At this moment, Jiraiya was also in a very good mood. Although he was just talking nonsense with an ordinary villager of Woodleaf, Jiraiya found that he enjoyed this kind of atmosphere so much, more than when he was with Mito Monitis, Zhuan Shaochun, Watergate and Tsunade. Chapter 358. Jiraiya himself was born in the marketplace, so when Jiraiya sat in the slightly narrow Ichiraka Ramen and ate the simple Ichiraka Ramen without using any high-end ingredients, Jiraiya felt like he belonged here. Temesa himself was very talkative. Occasionally he would joke with Jiraiya and say a few dirty jokes. The two old uncles also tacitly smiled at each other. Jiraiya's hearty laughter rushed out of Ichiraka Ramen. The thin curtain at the door echoed in the street. Occasionally, a few passers-by were attracted by Jiraiya's laughter. The bowl of noodles was quickly finished. Temesa looked around and saw that there were not many people in the shop, so he walked out from behind the counter and closed the door of his shop. Obviously, he did not intend to continue the business. He held a huge bottle in one hand. On the bottle seal there were 3 big words, Sakura Masamune. There was also a red ribbon near the mouth of the bottle. It looked very ugly. Jiraiya-sama, I see that there are not many people in the shop. Why don't you and I have a few drinks? With that, Temesa put the sake in his hand directly on the table. 2 delicate and small wine glasses were also taken out by Temesa from the bar. Obviously, Temesa was also a person who loved wine. Sakura Masamune was a very famous brand of sake, and these 2 obviously expensive white porcelain wine glasses were not common goods. Jiraiya himself also likes to drink a few glasses. After seeing that Temesa actually took out a wine like Sakura Masamune, he couldn't help but want to drink. After nodding, he said to Temesa, "If you want to drink a few glasses, I naturally can't refuse. Besides, good wine is easy to get, but a bosom friend is hard to find. Although we haven't known each other for long, we can be regarded as friends. Drinking is naturally not a problem." After listening to Jiraiya's words, Temesa looked proud. He was very happy to put the wine glass in his hand in front of Jiraiya and himself. He gently pulled out the cork of the sake in his hand. A very elegant fragrance wafted out of the bottle. Jiraiya, who was sitting next to him, smelled this smell and knew that this bottle of Sakura Masamune was definitely not a wine that was mass-produced by the winery, but a specially brewed ancient wine, that is, a sake that was suitable for long-term storage. This bottle of wine is different from ordinary wine. Temba naturally knew that Jiraiya was a wine expert, so he introduced it to Jiraiya. Ordinary sake can't be stored for a long time. Once it exceeds the shelf life, it will become turbid and sour. Temba naturally knew that Jiraiya was a wine expert, so he introduced it to Jiraiya. However, this bottle of wine in my hand is the kind of ancient wine that can be stored for decades without going bad. It has the meaning of everlasting. Our Yu family and the family that brewed Sakura have been friends for generations. When my daughter was born, they specially sent 5 bottles of ancient wine as a congratulatory gift. It's been 17 or 18 years. So it's a daughter's sake? Jiraiya also understood why he had such a bottle of wine. It was obviously not easy to get. This is your daughter's dowry, don't waste it. Let's find some other ordinary wine. When your daughter gets married, I will definitely come and have a good drink with you. Hearing Jiraiya's words, Temesa patted Jiraiya's shoulder and said to Jiraiya in a very forthright manner, "What are you talking about? Even if it's already opened, it can't be stored. Besides," Temesa looked back at his daughter who was still helping in the kitchen and said, "My daughter is very fierce. I don't know when she will find a good family. If we drink this bottle of sake, won't there still be 4 bottles of sake? The meaning of being in pairs is also good." Seeing Temesa speaking to this point, Jiraiya naturally couldn't refuse. He gently picked up the white porcelain cup in front of him, obviously waiting for Temesa to pour him a glass of wine. Temesa immediately understood and raised the bottle in his hand to pour wine for Jiraiya. Seeing that Jiraiya's cup was full, Temesa also filled his own cup. The 2 of them didn't touch their glasses. Instead, they placed their glasses on their foreheads to show their respect. After that, they finished the wine in their glasses. The customers in Ichiraku Ramen also finished their meal. Knowing that Temesa had the habit of drinking wine after graduation, they all greeted him and walked out of the restaurant. Temesa's daughter Chang also knew that his father finally met someone who could drink with her. She also very considerately began to tidy up the various kitchen utensils, tables, chairs, and garbage on the ground in the restaurant. Time passed by little, and the 2 liters bottle of sake was almost emptied by Jiraiya and Temari. The alcohol content of sake itself wasn't that high, but the aftereffects were very strong. What's more, the 2 drank a daughter's sake that had been stored for more than 10 years. This made Temesa and Jiraiya blush and talk nonsense from time to time. "What? Oi?" Jiraiya's mouth seemed to be stuffed with a ball. His words were somewhat muffled as he called Temesa. "Oi? What? What's wrong?" Temesa couldn't speak clearly, but he still subconsciously called out to Jiraiya. I'm so king sorry for the woman I love. For my own ideals, I dragged her into this fire pit again. Why am I such a coward? She left with leave because she was heartbroken, but I still shamelessly pulled her back. I'm so sorry for her, so sorry for her." Under the stimulation of alcohol, Jiraiya finally spoke out the words that he had been suppressing in his heart for the entire day. Jiraiya's sudden outburst startled the already drunk Temesa and Changpu, who was sitting on a chair beside him. They obviously didn't expect the amiable Jiraiya to reveal such an emotional side at this moment. Although Temurai was drunk, It seemed that he still retained some consciousness. He patted Jiraiya's shoulder and said to Jiraiya, "Oh, it's okay? Since she's willing to come back with you, then naturally she's prepared to come back. Life, after all, has to be faced. Perhaps this is a fire pit for her, but isn't a fire pit the best place to forge real gold? Don't worry. There's still plenty of time. If she really can't stay any longer, she won't hold it in and will just leave." Inside the Ichiraka ramen shop, Ichiraka was using his muffled words to appease Jiraiya, who didn't seem to be so calm. Outside the door of Ichiraka ramen, a woman with short blonde hair and a very hot figure was standing outside the shop. She had a purple diamond pattern between her eyebrows. She was wearing a beige inner green vest. Hearing Jiraiya's shouts from inside, her eyes couldn't help but soften. Chapter 359. Jiraiya didn't know how he got home, because his memory stopped at the moment when he was fighting with Tsunade. As a ninja, this kind of hangover is simply unimaginable. Although Jiraiya believes that he will never say something that endangers Woodleaf's secrets, he can't guarantee that he won't break out of some personal emotions. Jiraiya, who was annoyed at this moment, smelled the burnt smell of heated toast and fried eggs. There's actually breakfast? Jiraiya is a person who doesn't know how to cook at all. It can be seen from the paper shells of cups everywhere in Jiraiya's house. It's such a person, how can there be the smell of breakfast in his house? Isn't this a joke? Jiraiya lifted his quilt and found that his clothes have changed into his pajamas. He opened his pajama pants with a little curiosity. Jiraiya was immediately shocked. She had even changed her underwear? He put his feet into his slippers and walked out of his room in a panic. Jiraiya looked around and followed the smell of breakfast. A figure was standing in the kitchen at the moment, looking at the pan in front of him anxiously. There was a wisp of black smoke floating in the air at the moment, and the smell of burnt eggs was so conspicuous. But Jiraiya didn't have time to care about the burnt eggs because the person standing next to the stove and cooking in an apron turned out to be his teammate, Konoha Tsunade, who was also a Sannin like him. "Are you kidding me? Tsunade can cook?" Tsunade? Jiraiya said tentatively to Tsunade, who was standing opposite him. Tsunade seemed to be anxious about the burnt fried egg in front of her. She didn't even turn her face and shouted, "Ha! Ah! 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 What are you shouting for? Is this the time for you to talk? Hurry up and go to the dining table and clean up that mess. If that place isn't clean by the time I finish cooking, I'll break 3 of your ribs." His tone was still a bit rude, but Jiraiya seemed to have relaxed. He reached out and touched his chest as if confirming something. Tsunade was still the original Tsunade. What he saw just now was an illusion. An illusion. But in a place where Jiraiya couldn't see, Tsunade's face couldn't help but blush. Her face, which had become extremely youthful after cultivating the Yin-seal technique, combined with the blush on her face, made her look as beautiful as a 16-year-old girl in love. Because of Tsunade's threat just now, Jiraiya was cleaning up his house at full speed in order not to break 3 of his ribs. His speed was so fast that he left afterimages in the air. He didn't expect Jiraiya to use his full strength at this moment to clean up the house. Others didn't know, but Jiraiya knew that Tsunade was actually a little bit of a clean freak. If Tsunade saw that the house he cleaned up was still so messy, not to mention 3 of his ribs, even his life would be in danger. After a while, the house, which was originally filled with all kinds of garbage, was cleaned up spotless. But Jiraiya obviously didn't have so many bags to clean up the garbage. Where did so much garbage go? Jiraiya glanced at a large closet in the corner of his house from time to time. His nose even moved slightly as if he was smelling something strange. After sniffing for a while, he took out a bottle of air freshener and sprayed half of it at his house. However, the cabinet in the corner was still sprayed for a while. Just after Jiraiya was busy for a long time, Tsunade also finished her love breakfast. She was holding a plate with 2 cups of hot milk and 2 plates of toast and fried eggs that didn't look so good. "You, get over here and eat." Glancing at Jiraiya, who was sitting on the floor, Tsunade said to Jiraiya very domineeringly as if she was calling her own puppy. Okay. Obviously he was treated like this, but Jiraiya still looked happy as if he was very lucky to be treated like this by Tsunade. This is really a case of Zhou beating Huang Gai, an S and a masochist. She put the plate in her hand on a small table on the ground, looked at the dark edges of the fried eggs, and looked at Jiraiya, who was sitting next to her with a "I'm very obedient" look. She pushed the plate in front of Jiraiya and said to Jiraiya, "Eat." Jiraiya was like a robot that received an order. He directly reached out and grabbed the toast inside and stuffed it into his mouth. But because he ate too fast, he still reached out and grabbed the cup of milk and poured it into his mouth. He seemed to want to swallow the food in his mouth. Tsunade saw Jiraiya's appearance and for a while she couldn't help but laugh. She moved a little to Jiraiya's side, reached out and patted Jiraiya's back. She seemed to hope that Jiraiya would not choke and said to Jiraiya in a very gentle tone, "Well, don't worry, no one is going to rob you. You're the only one who would wolf down the food I make." Even Rope Tree would find all kinds of excuses to run away when he saw me cooking. He didn't want to be ravaged by my food. Hearing Tsunade's words, Jiraiya looked at Tsunade for no reason, but found that there was a trace of tears in the corner of Tsunade's eyes at this moment. This little bit of tears made Jiraiya's heart ache. He immediately swallowed the food in his mouth and said to Tsunade, "How can it be? The food you make is delicious." That's Nawaki's ambition. He doesn't know how to cherish the fruits of his sister's labor. If it were me, I would eat it even if it's not delicious. Looking at Jiraiya's clumsy comfort at this moment, Tsunade stretched out her hand and wiped the tear from the corner of her eye, and a smile bloomed on her face again. The traces of tears left on her face matched with Tsunade's bright face at this moment. She was like a red rose stained with dew, delicate and fresh. "This is what you said, then why don't you hurry up and finish these things?" Tsunade's rare coquettishness had slowly melted Jiraiya's manly heart into sweet candy, making it difficult to part with such a sweet feeling. Chapter 360. While eating, Jiraiya couldn't sit quietly anymore. After all, there were still a lot of questions in Jiraiya's heart. Whether it was how he came back from Ichiraka Ramen or how his clothes were all changed, these questions really made Jiraiya's heart itch. He really wanted to figure out what happened. After holding it for a long time, Jiraiya finally couldn't hold it anymore. Reiko, who had eaten half of the toast in her hand, tidied up her pajamas, turned slightly so that his face could face Tsunade's face. Jiraiya said very seriously, "Tsunade, although your cooking is delicious, I still have a few questions to ask you. Last night, I drank too much at Ichiraka Ramen's restaurant. What happened to me?" Before he finished speaking, Tsunade glanced at Jiraiya. She seemed to be curious why Jiraiya asked such a retarded question and said to Jiraiya, "I got it back for you. Asking questions always has to be done step by step. First ask how he came back, then ask how he changed his clothes, and finally ask who changed his underwear." Well, Jiraiya gave himself a string of 6666666 to praise his high-end chat skills. "Then what about my clothes?" Jiraiya tentatively asked Tsunade again, hoping to push his ultimate question a little closer. Tsunade was very cooperative. Although she still looked at Jiraiya like he was retarded, she still nodded and said to Jiraiya, "Yes, I also changed your pajamas." "Very well, the best part is coming soon." Thinking of the question he was about to ask, Jiraiya's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. He seemed to be very nervous. He reached out to take his milk to calm himself down, but Jiraiya, who was nervous, reached out his hand to Tsunade's glass of milk and poured it all into his mouth without thinking. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya with a restrained expression as he drank her milk. That was something she had drunk before. What does this wretched, perverted guy want to do? He really did drink. Now, there was still a little bit of alcohol left in his body to boost his courage. "So, ahem, then my underwear is?" Jiraiya asked his last question intermittently. Tsunade was still very indifferent to Jiraiya and said, "I also changed it." Hearing Tsunade's cold answer, Jiraiya was a little angry at that time. Although he was a little old, he was still very rich. In the past, when he went to the bath, everyone looked at his work with a respectful attitude. Since Tsunade changed his underwear for him, she naturally saw it. But why was she so cold? No man would be able to tolerate it. "Don't you think it's magnificent?" Jiraiya was still struggling, but Tsunade was still calm. Looking at Jiraiya's strange behavior, Tsunade pondered for a while. She seemed to have just understood what Jiraiya meant by magnificent. He said to Jiraiya calmly and even with a little pity, "Jiraiya, I am a doctor, a medical ninja. I still know some things and I also know the average of men. Don't be too sad. Take good care of yourself and keep a good schedule. Although there is no way to increase your size, it can still make you a little useful." Facing Tsunade's blatant flirting, Jiraiya didn't feel a little excited at the moment. Tsunade's words, as long as one has a normal IQ, they should understand. Tsunade meant that Jiraiya's capital was not so magnificent, and he even had some lingering thoughts. Hearing Tsunade's words, Jiraiya even began to suspect that the admiring eyes of the group of people when he went to the bathhouse were actually pitiful eyes. Jiraiya immediately turned gray at the moment, eating the food in front of him like a machine. Tsunade walked to the kitchen, took out a box of milk and poured it into her quilt. But her face had a touch of shyness and excitement after a successful prank. If I don't provoke you in return, wouldn't it be a disgrace to my reputation as Tsunade Heim? Thinking about it, Tsunade couldn't help but remember what she saw last night, and her cheeks blushed even more. In the Hokage's office, Tsunade and Jiraiya both sat in the chair opposite Watergate. Tsunade was in a good state. She looked energetic and she was obviously very motivated. At this moment, Jiraiya's eyes were bloodshot, and even the original shape of the tobacco pipe had become heavier. He muttered words like size and function back and forth in his mouth. Watergate couldn't say anything to his master, so he could only put Jiraiya aside and said to Tsunade first. Tsunade-sama, we have discussed the topic of how to train with Leaf's medical ninja before. After a discussion between me and the elders of Konoha, we agreed that you can select a ninja from the newly promoted genin for professional training. We have also prepared some information for you. You can choose the ninja you like for training. With that, Watergate also handed a thick folder on his desk to Tsunade. Among them was the comprehensive analysis of the genin who graduated from Woodleaf in the past 2 years. It was specially integrated to help Tsunade select training personnel, but it was uncertain how much Watergate's personal information was mixed in it. After all, it was better to use such a precious resource to train ninjas who could be loyal to Tsunade, right? Tsunade didn't care how much Watergate thought about this information. Before coming back, Tsunade said that she would not accept any combat tasks, and she would only be responsible for logistics. Tsunade also planned to verify this information herself. Presumably, with Watergate's political vision, he wouldn't cheat on such a thing. Otherwise, wouldn't Watergate's fraud be exchanged for Tsunade's fraud? It doesn't make any sense at all. Tsunade waved her hand, indicating that she could do her own things. Tsunade also knew that she shouldn't stay, so she turned around and walked out of the door. Chapter 361. Seeing that Tsunade had walked out of the door of his office, Watergate finally had a chance to pay attention to his master, Jiraiya, who was just sitting on the side with a dazed expression. Master. Master. Watergate tried to call his master, but found that Jiraiya didn't respond. Watergate could only stand up from his position, holding his desk with one hand and waving his hand in front of Jiraiya. Finally, Jiraiya broke free from his world. Master, are you okay? I have something to trouble you. Seeing that Jiraiya's matter was restored, Watergate also sat down in his seat and began to take out a document beside him to hand it to Jiraiya. But Jiraiya suddenly jumped up from where he was sitting and directly interrupted Watergate's words. Jiraiya looked anxious, looking at his apprentice sitting opposite him and said, Watergate, come here. Master has a presumptuous request. Take off your pants and I will explain the reason to you. Such words directly made Watergate's knees soften, and he had an impulse to kneel down. He has always known that his master liked Tsunade. But now, why did his sensei ask him to take off his pants? Could it be that he was stimulated by Tsunade and his whole body became bent? Although he is handsome, he is a man with a wife. How can he offer his chrysanthemum like this? The chilling sensation emanating from his buttocks caused Minato to sink into an exceedingly sensitive state of mind, as he probed his master with a probing tone. Master, did you just confess to Tsunade-sama and get cruelly rejected? You don't look normal at all. Watergate said to Jiraiya worriedly. After hearing Watergate's very unreliable words, Jiraiya gradually broke free from his frenzied emotions. Although it involves his privacy, Watergate is like his own child and there is nothing to hide. So Jiraiya told Watergate about what happened between him and Tsunade. Watergate was stunned after listening to the story. Fortunately, although his wife Shina Kushina learned medical ninjutsu from Tsunade for a while, she didn't directly become his disciple. Otherwise, God knows what his lovely wife Shina Kushina will become. If she's really the same as Tsunade now, then I'm really a little excited. Ba ba ba. After clearing all the complicated thoughts in his mind and trying to calm himself down, Watergate said to Jiraiya, Master, you don't have to worry, I've seen your friend, she is really above average. I think Tsunade-sama just wants to tease you, so you don't have to take it to heart. Let's get down to business. Hearing the recognition from his apprentice, Jiraiya, who was very self-doubting, finally got some spirit. I didn't expect that Tsunade, who I have loved for so many years, is so dirty. It seems that I have to find a way to improve my flirting skills. Of course, Jiraiya only thought so in his heart. After all, his apprentice has said that he wants to talk about business, so naturally Jiraiya has to give Watergate face. Tell me, what do you need me to help you with? Watergate handed the information he just picked up to Jiraiya. Jiraiya reached out and took it in his hand and began to slowly read the information. Jiraiya's originally lazy demeanor has become sharp at this moment. It seems that there is a kind of anger spreading in his heart. Nagato, Konan, and Yahiko, these three children are the founders of the Akatsuki organization that has always brought us great trouble, and they are also planning a plan that is enough to sweep the entire shinobi world? Although Jiraiya said it as a question, his dignified tone showed that he already believed the records in this document. Watergate took the document from Jiraiya's hand, pointed to a special symbol in the corner of the document and said to Jiraiya, "This document was found in a secret data room of Root when I was annihilating Root. It records in detail the birth of the Akatsuki, and the intervention of Danzo and Hanzo the Salamander in the annihilation of the Akatsuki, and the various small tricks that the Akatsuki has been using. I think the Akatsuki must be planning something big, and Sensei, you also said that this man named Nagato has the eyes of the Rikudo Sennin. We have to be careful. What do you need me to do? Clean up the sect." Jiraiya's eyes flashed with a trace of anger. Obviously facing such a disciple, he already had a trace of determination in his heart. Watergate waved his hand and said to Jiraiya, "For the time being, it's not the right time. If we don't kill the snake, it will only harm us. We can't attack so easily. The goal of the Akatsuki can be judged to be the Bijou, and Woodleaf has the most powerful Bijou, the Nine Tails. Since we have such a good card, naturally we can't play it so carelessly. What we need is to let Naruto grow quickly, and play a greater role in the future battle." Watergate said, and Jiraiya already understood what he meant. "You need me to help you train Naruto?" Minato nodded and continued, "That's right. Yes, about the way to control the chakra in my body, I have already asked Shinakushina to summarize a set of methods, and I will give it to you later. After a while you will take Naruto with you to the shinobi world, to a certain extent, disrupt the Akatsuki's line of sight, and do everything possible to improve Naruto's strength. The shinobi world is getting more and more difficult to calm down. While it's still calm, we have to do our best to accumulate our strength." Watergate said, and his whole body stood up. Jiraiya looked at his disciple, but found that his disciple at this moment was surging with an emotion that was completely invisible to him: ambition. After becoming the Hokage with real power, Watergate's ambition began to expand. Although Watergate still abided by his bottom line in many things, Watergate is no longer as gentle as he used to be. It seems that everyone will become different after having power, whether it's the 3 generations Hokage Orochimaru, first Hokage or second Hokage for power for their own status. They really made the shinobi world bleed too much. This is not what Jiraiya wants to see. Chapter 362. After the discussion between Jiraiya and Watergate, Naruto, who was confused and excited, quietly left the village with Jiraiya. Naruto didn't know what he would face in the future. To some extent, he even became a chess piece in the game between his father and Akatsuki. For Naruto, perhaps leaving Woodleaf with Jiraiya this time was actually the same as the previous mission he took with Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura to the Wave Country. It was just a slightly longer trip. What Jiraiya and Naruto didn't know was that when they left the Woodleaf, there was actually a person standing in a hidden place watching them leave the Woodleaf. This person was Tsunade, who had just returned to the Woodleaf. She thought that her overt and covert hints these days had made Jiraiya understand her feelings, but now when Jiraiya encountered Woodleaf's business that conflicted with her personal affairs, he still chose to leave resolutely instead of continuing to cultivate feelings with her. Looking at Jiraiya's back that was slightly old because of the vicissitudes of life, Tsunade could only shake her head and laugh at her ignorance. Didn't she already know? Jiraiya was a fool. No matter what happened, he would always put Woodleaf first. He had already known about this for decades. But why now, watching Jiraiya leave Woodleaf in Tsunade's heart, there was a kind of sadness as if she was abandoned. Sparkling teardrops were born in her eyes, gently brushing across Tsunade's smooth cheeks, leaving a faint tear stain which made people feel heartache. Tears dripped from her chin, and drops of tears blended into the soil and disappeared, leaving only a little bit of moisture. But the scarred heart seemed to have added another scar at this moment, which was difficult to heal. "I am Tsunade, the current director of Kiba Hospital and the commander-in-chief of the Woodleaf Medical Force. Of course, you don't need to remember that I have such an identity. Here, I only have one identity, and that is your sensei. You are all ninjas with medical ninja talent that I have found from the new ninjas in the past 2 years. In the next period of time, you will receive a training plan designated by me to train you to become a truly qualified medical ninja. If I feel that the best among you is to my liking, I may accept him or her as my official disciple. Looking at the hundreds of young ninjas standing in front of her, Tsunade said to them in a very heroic manner. Behind Tsunade stood Shizun, who had always been Tsunade's little follower, and Shinakushina, who had studied under Tsunade for a while. Before, because Tsunade and Jiraiya's speed was too fast, Shizun didn't follow Jiraiya and Tsunade to participate in the welcome ceremony for Tsunade's return at the Woodleaf Gate. After arriving at Woodleaf, Shizun basically lived in seclusion to take care of Tsunade's life. This was the first time she appeared in front of so many people. Although she forced herself to be calm, after all, she was still young, and her psychological quality was not so good. She couldn't help but blush with excitement. Compared to Shizun, Shinakushina, who had red hair and looked equally heroic, seemed to be more at ease. Over the years, as her injured body slowly recovered and Watergate's power continued to expand, Shinakushina also slowly appeared in the public eye. Watergate naturally had unconditional trust in his wife, and many things were slowly delegated to Shinakushina. One of the executors of the plan to cultivate a new type of medical ninja was also designated as Shinakushina, who had a certain understanding of medical ninjutsu. Hearing Tsunade's promise to accept a disciple, the young ninjas standing below immediately became excited. Almost everyone standing here knew something about Woodleaf's medical system, and as the leader of Woodleaf's medical industry, Tsunade's deeds were naturally known by these children. If she could become the disciple of such a great person, wouldn't her future be limitless? Standing in the crowd, Haruno Sakura, Yamanaka Ino, and Hyuga Hinata's eyes also lit up at this moment. Sakura was selected as one of the trainee medical ninja because of her meticulous control of chakra. Yamanaka Ino was extremely strong because of the Yamanaka family's secret technique, and also qualified to become a medical ninja. Hinata was even more so. The Byakugan itself was a medical artifact. Even experienced medical ninja couldn't identify the meridians and acupuncture points. As newly graduated genin, all 3 children became members of Woodleaf's medical ninja training program. Seeing that the children in front of her were all excited, Tsunade also turned to look at Shizun standing behind her. Shizun also understood Tsunade's meaning and stepped forward a few steps to the group of ninjas standing below the stage and said, "Everyone quiet down, I have something to announce. You have all passed the test of control of chakra and spiritual strength, so I will now announce what the first assessment is for you." Shizun said, and with a wave of her hand, the ninjas belonging to Kiba Hospital standing on both sides took a scroll and distributed it to each ninja standing below. As we all know, medical ninjutsu is actually a ninjutsu system that uses various forms of stimulation to make the cells of the human body perform various functions. As the foundation of all medical ninjutsu, the cultivation method of healing technique is recorded in detail in the scroll in your hands. Every medical ninja should not be a mass-produced healing machine, but a qualified ninja with their own opinions and thoughts. Therefore, your first assessment is to learn the healing technique recorded in the scroll in your hands and apply it to living body healing. Anyone who can pass this assessment will have the opportunity to receive more professional medical ninja guidance. Everyone, is it clear? In the face of Shizun's sudden question, whether they were ignorant or really understood, they all answered with a loud yes. Tsunade nodded and left the huge classroom with Shinakushina, Shizun, and a group of medical ninjas belonging to Kiba Hospital, leaving only the genin who were either sad or excited. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.